Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why being a medieval knight was less about chivalric glory and more about enduring endless blisters and debts. What you're about to discover might surprise you. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. Ever found yourself daydreaming about being a medieval knight, galloping across fields with the wind in your hair and a noble quest in your heart? Well, snap out of it, because the reality is more Game of Loans than Game of Thrones. Forget the romanticized Hollywood version. Becoming a knight was less about honor and more about the economics of survival and social climbing in a brutal world. First off, let's talk about getting your foot in the door, or should I say, stirrup. Contrary to popular belief, you didn't have to be born with a silver spoon or a family crest to your name to become a knight. Sure, noble blood helped grease the wheels, but the medieval times were rife with social mobility, if you had the cash. And by cash, I mean serious moolah. Just to get suited up, you'd be looking at around £40 for a full set of armor, equivalent to about $50,000 in today's terms. And that's just the armor, not the horse, which could set you back another £30. Horses weren't just pets. They were your battle buddies and status symbols rolled into one. So, unless your dad was swimming in gold, you'd need to start saving early or find a wealthy patron willing to fund your knighthood dreams. Think of it as a medieval Kickstarter campaign, except instead of promising backers a cool t-shirt, you'd offer your undying loyalty and a slice of whatever spoils of war you could muster. But let's say you found the cash, and you're ready to dive into the knightly lifestyle. You'd start as a page, generally around the age of 7. Yup, before you even hit double digits, you're packed off to a lord's castle to learn the ropes. Forget about cartoons and candy. Your days are filled with lessons in manners, languages, and a bit of swordplay to prepare you for the next step, becoming a squire. As a squire, usually between the ages of 14 and 21, you're basically a knight's intern. But instead of fetching coffee, you're maintaining armor, caring for horses, and learning the finer points of combat. It's grueling work, and you'd probably spend more time scrubbing chainmail than swinging swords. Your knightly mentor wasn't just there to teach, but to test you, to ensure you could handle the brutal realities of warfare and the equally brutal realities of medieval hygiene. All this training wasn't just for the sake of swinging a sword gracefully. Knights were the tanks of their time, and the battlefield was your proving ground. Fail there, and no amount of noble blood or shiny armor would save you. The chivalric code, often romanticized as a set of noble principles, was more of a PR strategy than a way of life. It was about maintaining order and loyalty, not rescuing damsels in distress. As historian Maurice Keene put it, chivalry was a martial class's attempt at self-justification. Remember, this was a world where warfare was constant and brutal, and knights were at its bloody heart. The 100 Years' War, for instance, kicked off in 1337 and dragged on for more than a century. That's a lot of battles, a lot of sieges, and a lot of chances to lose life or limb. The Battle of Agincourt in 1415 is a vivid example. Thousands of knights marched confidently into battle, only to be decimated by English longbowmen. Chivalry didn't count for much when arrows were flying. And while we're at it, let's debunk the idea that knights were always gallant and honorable. Many were little more than thugs with noble titles, using their skills and status to extract taxes, settle scores, and generally make life difficult for the peasants they were supposed to protect. A knight's reputation was hard-won, and not always through deeds that would make a bard sing. So why go through all this hassle? Well, knighthood was one of the few paths to power and prestige if you weren't born a noble. It offered a chance to rise above the muck of everyday life, gain land, and maybe even marry well. But it was a gamble, like playing the world's deadliest lottery. To wrap it up, being a knight was a complex blend of social ambition, economic necessity, and sheer survival instinct. The romantic myths endure because they're thrilling and heroic, but the truth is, for most knights, it was just another day at the medieval office, one with a very high chance of not coming home. So next time you think about darning that armor and riding into the sunset, remember, it's not all tournaments and courtly love. Sometimes it's just a lot of mud, sweat, and very expensive metal. So, as you're clanging around in your shiny and very pricey armor, dreaming of glory and a castle with a moat, let's get real about the medieval grind. Being a knight wasn't just about dashing into battle with a dramatic flourish. Oh no, it was more like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope over a pit filled with alligators. First off, let's tackle the not-so-glamorous side gig of land management. You see, knights were basically the middle managers of the medieval world. If you were lucky enough to be granted a fief, a slice of land from your liege lord, you weren't kicking back in a recliner made of gold. Nope, you were knee-deep in the mud of feudal bureaucracy. Managing a fief was like running a small business, except instead of spreadsheets, you had peasants, and instead of a board of directors, you had the very real threat of armed rebellion if you messed up. Now, you might think, hey, land equals power, right? Isn't that the dream? Sure, if your dream includes overseeing crop rotations, collecting taxes in kind, reed, chickens and grain, not cash, and arbitrating disputes between your serfs about whose cow chewed whose cabbage. On top of that, you better hope your land produced enough to cover your own expenses. Because, surprise, being a knight wasn't cheap. Let's talk about the economic black hole that was knightly existence. Maintaining your armor was like owning a vintage car that constantly needed repairs, but couldn't be traded in for a newer model. That gleaming suit of armor wasn't a one-time purchase. Repairs and replacements were a constant drain on your purse. A single sword could cost a small fortune, upwards of £1, which could feed a peasant family for a year. And just like a car, you needed insurance of sorts, hiring blacksmiths to patch up dents or replace your helmet when it got cleaved in two. And then there were your trusty steeds. Horses were the medieval equivalent of a sports car, flashy, expensive, and high maintenance. Not only did you need a warhorse for battle, but also a few backup horses for travel and tournaments. Each horse required a stable, feed, and care, all of which added up faster than you could say nay. Speaking of tournaments, let's debunk another romantic myth. Tournaments might sound like medieval Coachella, with knights showing off their skills to an adoring crowd. In reality, they were more like a high-stakes poker game where you could lose your shirt, literally. While they offered the chance to win fame and maybe even a purse of coins, the costs of entry, travel, and potential injuries were substantial. Imagine spending a hefty entry fee just to get whacked off your horse and have your armor dented beyond recognition, all while trying to impress a crowd that's just there for the medieval equivalent of reality TV drama. And then there was the small matter of constant military readiness. Remember, as a knight, you were expected to be battle-ready at all times. That meant keeping your armor polished, your sword sharp, and your body in peak condition. Training was ongoing, exercises in horsemanship, archery, and melee combat. Knights practiced in tilt yards, trying not to impale each other in the process, because nothing says best buddies like accidentally skewering your pal during practice. When you weren't busy with combat drills, you were on call for campaigns. The call to arms could come at any moment, and you were obliged to serve your liege for up to 40 days without pay, after which you could start charging for your services. But here's the kicker. Those campaigns were costly affairs. You had to fund your own equipment and provisions, and while you might get loot as a reward, it was hardly guaranteed. One day you might be plundering with the best of them, and the next you're stuck in a soggy tent, wondering why you didn't just stick to farming. Chivalry might have been the code, but survival was the game. Image of knights as the epitome of honor glosses over the fact that many were essentially mercenaries looking to climb the social ladder. A knight's life was a careful balance of diplomacy, warfare, and economics. You couldn't just be a warrior. You had to be a politician, a businessman, and occasionally a ruthless enforcer. So, while the legends of courtly love and gallant deeds are alluring, the day-to-day life was often more mundane, punctuated by moments of brutal reality. It was about enduring as much as it was about conquering. The knightly path was fraught with obstacles, financial woes, political intrigue, and the ever-present threat of violence. Yet, for those who could navigate the minefield, the rewards of land, power, and prestige beckoned like a shimmering grail on the horizon. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the knightly saga. Next time, we'll explore the social and political labyrinth knights navigated and how they balanced personal ambition with the demands of loyalty and fealty. But for now, remember, a knight's tale was not all glory and grandeur. It was a life of complexity, challenge, and above all, relentless perseverance. And speaking of relentless perseverance, let's dive into the real meat and potatoes of a knight's life, the medieval battlefield. Forget the Hollywood gloss of knights as invincible warriors gliding effortlessly through combat. The reality was more like a medieval marsh pit, chaotic, brutal, and with questionable hygiene. Let's start with the conditions. Imagine standing in a field, ankle-deep in mud, rain pouring down, and the smell of fear mingling with horse sweat. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, right? Battles were often fought in the worst possible conditions, and the weather was just the beginning of your troubles. You're fighting not just the enemy, but also the elements and your own armor, which, despite its protective benefits, could feel like a fully loaded sauna. Now, let's talk about the actual fighting. The swordplay that looks so graceful in movies. Yeah, not so much. Real medieval combat was messy and exhausting. Knights were trained to swing heavy weapons, like swords and maces, with enough force to crush armor and bone. Picture it. You're swinging a 3-foot-long piece of iron, trying not to get hit by arrows, spears, or the business end of a war hammer. As much as the chivalric code preached honor, there was nothing honorable about the sheer carnage of battle. Mortality rates were sky-high. According to historian Clifford Rogers, during the 100-year span of the 100 Years' War, more than half of England's knights died in battle or from resulting injuries. And if you survived the day, you still faced the very real threat of infection from wounds, given the non-existence of antibiotics and hand sanitizer. Remember, this was a time when a scratch from a rusty blade could be a death sentence. The psychological toll was equally severe. Imagine the constant stress of knowing that every campaign could be your last. PTSD, a term coined much later, was likely rampant but unrecognized. The nightmares of the battlefield didn't end once you left the field. They followed you into the quiet of night, disrupting your sleep as you relived the chaos and carnage over and over. Yet, despite these hardships, knights were essential to medieval warfare. They were the tanks of their time, heavily armored and mobile. Their presence on the battlefield could tip the scales of a fight. But as warfare evolved, so did tactics. The longbow, for example, was a game-changer. In battles like Agincourt in 1415, English longbowmen shredded French knights, proving that mobility and range could trump brute force. Even the heaviest armor couldn't protect a knight from a well-aimed arrow piercing through a visor slit. As the medieval period trudged on, knights found themselves facing new challenges. The introduction of gunpowder weapons in the 14th century started to make traditional armor obsolete. The once mighty knight, who had been the backbone of armies for centuries, began to see his role decline. By the end of the 15th century, the knight was no longer the king of battlefields. Infantry and artillery began to take center stage, and the knight's role shifted from frontline warrior to more of a specialized, albeit dwindling, force. In essence, the battlefield was a brutal teacher, and the lessons it taught were hard and fast. Knights learned to adapt or face obsolescence. This wasn't just about individual survival, but about the survival of the knightly class as a whole. The world was changing, and those who couldn't change with it were left behind, clinging to their rusting armor and fading glory. So, while the romantic image of the knight in shining armor endures, remember that the reality was far more complex and far less glamorous. It was a life of constant adaptation, a balancing act of courage, strategy, and survival. Knights were not just warriors. They were living in a world that demanded more than just strength. It demanded cunning and resilience. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the medieval knight saga. Next, we'll explore the political chessboard knights navigated, how alliances were forged and broken, and the delicate dance of loyalty and ambition. But for now, keep in mind that the tale of a knight was one of grit as much as gallantry, of mud and blood as much as valor. Politics, the real battlefield where knights often found themselves swinging metaphorical swords. It was a world where loyalty was currency, and betrayal was just another Tuesday. If you thought the physical battlefield was treacherous, wait until you hear about the political minefield knights had to navigate. Medieval politics was like a never-ending game of chess, only the pieces were real people, and losing often meant losing your head. Literally. First off, let's talk about feudal obligations. The knightly class was bound by a web of duties that would make your modern-day employment contract look like a pamphlet. You owed military service to your liege lord, who in turn owed allegiance to someone higher up the food chain, all the way up to the king. This meant your life could be flipped upside down, the whims of your superiors. Imagine you're just about to enjoy a rare day off, maybe a nice afternoon with your favorite loot, when suddenly a messenger arrives. Pack your bags, we're off to war. You couldn't exactly call in sick. Now, if you think feudal obligations were straightforward, think again. The medieval hierarchy was about as clear as muddy water. Loyalties shifted faster than a toddler's attention span, and alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Take the infamous War of the Roses as an example, an epic squabble between the houses of Lancaster and York that spanned from 1455 to 1487. Knights found themselves pledging fealty to one side, only to switch allegiances as the political winds changed. It was less about loyalty and more about survival. Get it wrong, and you'd be on the losing side of history, and possibly the losing side of a beheading. And speaking of switching sides, let's not forget the ultimate medieval double agent, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, also known as the Kingmaker. This guy was the Tony Stark of medieval politics, rich, influential, and playing both sides like an expert. Warwick switched allegiances between the Lancasters and Yorkists more times than a cat has lives, proving that in medieval politics, the only constant was change, and maybe the occasional stab in the back. But why all this political hopscotch? Well, at its core, it was about power and land. Knights were always on the hunt for greener pastures, literally and figuratively. Land meant wealth, and wealth meant influence. But acquiring it was like a high-stakes poker game where everyone had a hidden ace. You had to be crafty, shrewd, and let's face it, a bit ruthless. And if that meant cozying up to a rival only to stab them in the back when their guard was down, so be it. Honor was a nice idea, but survival was the real name of the game. Take the example of Sir Hugh Despenser the Younger, a favorite of King Edward Roman II. Through strategic marriages and alliances, he accumulated vast estates and power, much to the chagrin of other nobles. His rise was meteoric, but his fall was even more spectacular, executed by the very barons he had outmaneuvered, proving that in the cutthroat world of medieval politics, what goes up must come down, and sometimes it comes down with a thud. Yet, despite these treacherous waters, this was a time when the spoils could be great for those bold enough to seize them. The allure of power and prestige was a siren song that many knights couldn't resist, but like any good cautionary tale, it came with a catch. For every knight who gained a castle, there was another who lost his head, literally or metaphorically. It was a precarious balance of ambition and caution, a dance with one foot in the grave and the other on a slippery slope. So, how did knights manage to keep their heads, figuratively and literally, amidst this political chaos? By mastering the art of diplomacy and deception. You had to be as skilled with words as you were with a sword. Forging alliances was crucial, but so was knowing when to cut ties and run. It was about reading the room, understanding the shifting sands of power, and sometimes simply knowing when to keep your mouth shut. Not everything had to be solved with a lance or a sword. Sometimes a well-placed whisper could achieve more than 1,000 troops. In essence, the political landscape was as challenging as the battlefield, demanding not just martial prowess, but also a keen mind and a silver tongue. While the stories of gallant knights and noble deeds capture the imagination, the truth was far more complex. Knights were not just warriors in shining armor. They were players in a game of thrones, balancing loyalty and ambition, ever aware that one misstep could be their last. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life of a knight, delving deeper into the intricate social fabric they had to navigate. Next time, we'll look at the cultural expectations and personal ambitions that drove knights to seek glory and fortune, and how these forces shaped their lives and legacies. But for now, remember, the knightly tale was one of grit, guile, and a healthy dose of gallows humor. After all, in a world where your best friend could be your worst enemy, sometimes all you could do was laugh. Now, let's pivot from the political chessboard to the grand finale of the knightly saga, the decline of the knight as the ultimate power player. This wasn't a sudden fall from grace, but more like a slow erosion, like a sandcastle facing the relentless tide of change. By the end of the 15th century, knights found themselves edged out by economic shifts and technological leaps that made their once unassailable role look as outdated as a flip phone in the age of smartphones. For starters, let's talk about the economic elephant in the room, the rise of centralized power. As monarchies consolidated, kings began to favor standing armies over the feudal levies that knights had traditionally led. Why? Because standing armies could be paid directly, making them loyal to the crown rather than to a patchwork of feudal lords with their own agendas. This was a big deal, folks. Imagine the king as a CEO who realized he could bypass middle management and hire specialists directly. Suddenly, knights were no longer indispensable. They were just another line item in the royal budget that could be trimmed. And then there was the Black Powder Revolution. Gunpowder, that Chinese invention which had already been causing fireworks, literally, finally made its way into European warfare in a big way. By the 14th century, cannons were blasting holes in castle walls, and handguns were popping up on battlefields like medieval pop music. This was bad news for knights, whose armor, once the cutting edge of medieval fashion and protection, was about as useful against bullets as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The Battle of Crecy in 1346 was a wake-up call, with English longbowmen decimating French knights before they could even get close. Fast forward to the Battle of Pavia in 1525, and you have the Spanish arquebusiers mowing down French knights with handheld firearms. These battles hammered home a brutal truth. The days of knights as kings of the battlefield were over. The knight was like a blockbuster video store in a Netflix world, no longer relevant and hopelessly outdated. As if that wasn't enough, the socio-economic landscape was shifting like sand dunes in a storm. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, wiped out a third of the population, creating labor shortages that empowered peasants. Suddenly, the serfs were calling some of the shots, demanding wages and better conditions, which meant feudal lords, and by extension knights, were losing their grip on the social order. The knightly class, which had thrived on this feudal system, found themselves increasingly out of step with the times. Now, you might think this would be the end of the knight's story, but here's where things get interesting. Despite their decline as a military force, the myth of the knight persisted, growing ever stronger in the cultural imagination. Romanticized tales of knights rescuing damsels and slaying dragons became the stuff of legend, even as real knights were trading their lances for less glamorous roles in bureaucratic or ceremonial positions. So why does the myth endure? Well, who doesn't love a good story? The knightly ideal taps into something deep within us, a longing for heroism, honor, and adventure. It's the same reason we love superheroes today. They represent the best of us, even if the reality is far more complex. The legend of the knight is a comforting narrative, a tale of nobility and valor that offers a stark contrast to the gritty realities of medieval life. Yet, as we wrap up this saga, let's not forget the lessons history teaches us. The story of the knight is a cautionary tale about the dangers of clinging to outdated models in a rapidly changing world. It's a reminder that adaptation is key to survival. Whether you're a medieval knight facing the dawn of gunpowder or a modern-day worker navigating the digital revolution. In the end, the knight's tale is one of transformation, both personal and societal. It's about the shift from a world ruled by muscle and steel to one dominated by innovation and strategy. And while the armor may have rusted and the lances may have been laid down, the spirit of the knight lives on in our collective imagination, a testament to the enduring power of myth. So the next time you see a knight in shining armor, whether in a movie or on a tapestry, remember the real story behind the glinting steel and the flowing banners. It's a story of grit and grace, of rise and fall, and above all, of the relentless march of change. And who knows, maybe there's a little bit of knight in all of us, striving for greatness, fighting our own battles, and dreaming of a better world. Little did young Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst know that her journey from a minor German princess to Russia's formidable Empress would become the stuff of legends and Netflix series. Born on May 2, 1729, in Stettin, now Szczecin, Poland, Sophie was not exactly the girl you'd expect to end up ruling the vast Russian Empire. Yet, here's the kicker, she did. and she did it with a flair that could make any reality TV star blush. Sophie's early life was a whirlwind of courtly formalities and social gymnastics. Her father, Christian August, wasn't exactly royalty material, being more of a mid-tier princeling with a fondness for soldiering. Her mother, Johanna Elizabeth, had aspirations so high they probably needed a visa to reach Russia. Johanna was the classic 18th century stage mom, her eyes perpetually scanning for the next big marital opportunity. Spoiler alert, she found it in the Russian crown. You see, the Russian Empress Elizabeth had a rather unique problem. Her nephew and heir, Peter, was about as popular as a snowstorm in June and had the charisma of a soggy cabbage. The Empress needed a suitable wife for him, someone who could handle the icy halls of the Russian court and, more importantly, produce an heir that didn't resemble a nervous wreck. Enter Sophie, the German princess with a knack for languages and a spine of steel. At the tender age of 14, Sophie was packed up like an 18th century influencer on tour and shipped off to Russia. Imagine the cultural shock, leaving the cozy confines of Prussian society to land in the chaos that was the Russian court. It's like switching from a sleepy book club to the Super Bowl halftime show. And yet, Sophie adapted like a champ. She learned Russian, converted to orthodoxy, and took on the name Catherine, all in a day's work for the future Empress. Catherine's marriage to Peter Roman III was strategically brilliant, but personally disastrous. Picture this: a teenage girl marrying a man-child who preferred playing with toy soldiers to ruling an empire. The couple's wedding in 1745 was less a union of hearts and more a political chess move. The Russian court was a hotbed of intrigue, and Catherine had to learn the game, and fast. She was like a contestant on a survival show, navigating the treacherous waters of court politics and societal expectations. While Peter was busy reenacting battles with his toy soldiers, Catherine was busy ingratiating herself with the Russian nobility and military. She read voraciously, educating herself on politics, philosophy, and the art of governance. She might have been forced into the role of a submissive wife, but Catherine had no intention of staying in the shadows. She was laying the groundwork for her own rule, one calculated step at a time. The Russian court was a circus, and Catherine was its star acrobat. Elizabeth's Russia was a place where you could lose your head, literally, over the wrong word or alliance. Yet Catherine, with her sharp wit and strategic mind, managed to stay one step ahead. She cultivated allies among the powerful guards and courtiers, understanding that in the game of Russian politics, your life depended on who had your back and who didn't have a knife poised behind it. Catherine's story is often romanticized, but let's not kid ourselves. This was a woman who knew how to play hardball. Her transformation from Sophie to Catherine was not just a change of name, but a strategic metamorphosis. She embraced orthodoxy with a zeal that would make a televangelist proud. But this wasn't just about religious fervor. It was about survival and adaptation in a world where the wrong move could end with a swift trip to Siberia. Now, let's talk about Peter Roman III for a moment. The man was a walking contradiction, a German prince ruling over Russia, more interested in Prussian military tactics than Russian affairs. His reign, when it came, was brief and chaotic. But while Peter was busy alienating everyone around him, Catherine was quietly building a network of support. If Peter was the storm, Catherine was the eye, calm and calculating. In the background of all this, Russia was undergoing its own upheavals. The empire was a sprawling patchwork of cultures and tensions, a place where serfs toiled under the iron grip of landowners, and where the nobility schemed for power and influence. Catherine stepped into this world with the determination of someone who knew she was destined for more than just a footnote in history. By the time Peter ascended the throne in 1762, Catherine was already a master of court politics. She had turned herself from a foreign interloper into a Russian icon, a transformation as profound as it was necessary. Her ascent to power was not just a story of personal ambition, but a testament to her adaptability and intelligence. The girl from Anhalt-Zerbst had become the future Empress of Russia, and she was just getting started. Catherine the Great's early life is often painted with the broad strokes of legend, but beneath the romanticism lies a tale of grit, strategy, and an uncanny ability to read the political winds, navigated the dangerous waters of 18th century Russia with a poise that belied her youth, setting the stage for what would become one of the most remarkable reigns in history. And as anyone familiar with her story will tell you, the best was yet to come. As Catherine navigated the treacherous waters of Russian court life, she was like a chess grandmaster, plotting 10 moves ahead, while everyone else was still fumbling with their pawns. The palace was a hotbed of intrigue and absurdity, a place where loyalties shifted faster than a cat on a hot tin roof, and where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. The court was a world where the glitter of chandeliers masked the darkness of political machinations, and Catherine had the savvy to see through the facade. The Russian court was a bizarre blend of opulence and paranoia, where the wrong word could land you in a Siberian exile faster than you could say borscht. Every day was a high-stakes game of survival, and Catherine was playing to win. Her keen understanding of human nature allowed her to charm the right people while keeping her true intentions concealed. It was a delicate dance, and Catherine had the moves to make Fred Astaire look like he had 2 left feet. In 1762, the stage was set for one of the most remarkable power plays in history. Peter Roman III, who finally ascended the throne after the death of Empress Elizabeth, proved himself to be about as effective a ruler as a chocolate teapot. His policies were as popular as a tax audit, and his obsession with Prussian military reforms alienated the Russian nobility faster than a snowstorm in July. Peter's reign was brief and chaotic, a whirlwind of unpopular decisions that left him isolated and vulnerable. Enter Catherine, who had been patiently biding her time, cultivating allies among the military and nobility. She was the eye of the storm, calm and calculating, ready to seize the moment. Her coup d'etat was a masterclass in political maneuvering, executed with the precision of a surgeon. On June 28, 1762, Catherine made her move, rallying the support of the powerful Imperial Guard and securing the backing of key military leaders. The coup was swift and decisive, a testament to Catherine's political acumen and her ability to inspire loyalty in those around her. Peter, caught off guard and lacking the support needed to counter the uprising, abdicated with a resignation that was almost comical in its lack of resistance. Catherine's ascent to the throne was not just a victory for her, but a triumph for political strategy over brute force. Of course, the myths surrounding Catherine's rise are as intoxicating as a shot of vodka, but the reality is far more nuanced. The romanticized image of Catherine as a cunning seductress who charmed her way to power is a simplification that overlooks the tactical brilliance and calculated risk-taking that defined her coup. Catherine's ability to read the political landscape, to understand the motivations and fears of those around her, was the true cornerstone of her success. Peter's abdication was followed by his mysterious death just 8 days later, a twist of fate that fueled rumors and speculation for centuries. Was he murdered on Catherine's orders, or did he fall victim to the chaotic political climate he had helped create? The truth remains elusive, shrouded in the fog of history. What is clear, however, is that Catherine emerged from the ordeal not only as the ruler of Russia, but as a symbol of resilience and adaptability. The economic context of Catherine's rise is also worth noting. Russia in the mid-18th century was a land of stark contrasts, with immense wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority of the population lived in poverty. The nobility, on whom Catherine relied for support, were motivated by their own economic interests, seeking to maintain their privileged status in a rapidly changing world. Catherine's ability to navigate these economic realities, to balance the interests of the nobility with the needs of a vast and diverse empire, was a key factor in her success. Catherine's coup marked the beginning of a new era for Russia, a period of reform and modernization that would transform the empire into a major European power. Her reign would be characterized by a series of ambitious initiatives aimed at revitalizing the Russian economy, expanding its territorial reach, and enhancing its cultural and intellectual life. But these were challenges for another day. For now, Catherine had secured her place on the throne, and the future was hers to shape. As we delve deeper into the life of Catherine the Great, it becomes clear that her story is not just one of personal ambition, but a reflection of the broader social and political forces at play in 18th century Russia. Her ability to navigate the complexities of court life, to understand the motivations of those around her, and to seize opportunities as they arose, was nothing short of remarkable. Catherine's rise to power is a testament to the power of strategy, the importance of adaptability, and the enduring allure of a well-played political game. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the layers of Catherine's remarkable reign, exploring the reforms, challenges, and triumphs that defined her legacy as one of history's most formidable rulers. There's much more to come in the saga of Catherine the Great, and the best is yet to unfold. As Catherine ascended to the throne, she found herself the captain of a ship sailing through the stormy seas of 18th century Russia, a vast empire that was as bewildering as it was beautiful. Her reign promised a transformation, but the path ahead was littered with challenges that would test her mettle and her monarchy. First up on Catherine's imperial to-do list was reforming the government. Picture a bureaucratic beast so tangled in red tape it could make a modern DMV look like a model of efficiency. Catherine rolled up her sleeves and initiated a series of commissions to streamline administration, tackling the centuries-old mess head-on. She reorganized provincial governments, creating 50 gubernias to enhance local governance. Each was equipped with a governor and a council, resembling a medieval Game of Thrones, but with more paperwork and fewer dragons. Catherine's reforms weren't just about making bureaucrats shuffle faster. She aimed to root out corruption and incompetence. She introduced the instruction, or nakaz, in 1767, a legal code inspired by Enlightenment ideals, drawing from Montesquieu and Beccaria. It was a bold move, considering the Russian legal system at the time was as coherent as a toddler's crayon drawing. Though the nakaz didn't become law, it sparked debates and set a tone for future reforms. Education was another frontier where Catherine wielded her reformist sword. She believed in the transformative power of education, and in 1764 she established the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, the first state-funded school for girls in Russia. It was a radical step in a society that viewed women as little more than marriage fodder. Catherine also founded the Russian Academy of Sciences and sought to promote the arts with fervor that would put a modern-day culture minister to shame. But before we crown Catherine the original feminist, let's remember that her educational policies were mostly for the elite. The idea of teaching serfs to read was as popular as a porcupine at a balloon party. Nevertheless, her efforts laid the groundwork for future educational reforms. Catherine's correspondence with Enlightenment heavyweights like Voltaire and Diderot shows her intellectual curiosity and desire to bring European sophistication to Russia's doorstep. Diderot even visited her in 1773, reportedly leaving with a lighter heart and heavier pockets, thanks to Catherine's patronage. Catherine's cultural overhauls extended beyond books and into the realm of architecture. She embarked on an ambitious building spree, transforming St. Petersburg with neoclassical marvels like the Hermitage Museum. Imagine a cityscape evolving like a time-lapse video, each new edifice a testament to the Empress's vision. Her passion for the arts might have been genuine, but it also served as a political tool to project an image of a modernizing Russia. A bit of smoke and mirrors, perhaps, but effective nonetheless. Let's talk economics, a topic as dry as Siberian toast, but bear with me. Catherine inherited an economy that was a patchwork quilt of inefficiencies. Agriculture was the backbone, with serfs chained to their plows like medieval oxen. The state treasury was as empty as a politician's promise, partly due to the 7 Years' War. Catherine's solution encouraged trade and industry. She relaxed trade restrictions, founded new towns, and boosted the iron and textile industries. Foreign trade increased by over 50% during her reign, a staggering figure for the time. Yet, economic reforms were a double-edged sword. While nobility and merchants prospered, serfs bore the brunt. Catherine's attempts at reforming serfdom were akin to putting a band-aid on a gaping wound. Serfdom was entrenched, and any attempt to alter it risked alienating the very nobility she depended on for support. It was a delicate balancing act, and Catherine knew better than to rock the boat too hard. As if domestic challenges weren't enough, Catherine's reign was marked by the ever-looming shadow of war. The Russo-Turkish Wars were a series of conflicts that saw Catherine flex her military muscles. The first, from 1768 to 1774, ended with the Treaty of Kusuk-Kainaka, which granted Russia access to the Black Sea. an essential strategic victory. The second, from 1787 to 1792, further solidified Russia's territorial expansion, leaving the Ottomans reeling. Catherine's military campaigns weren't just about land grabs, they were about prestige and power projection. Russia's victories under her command transformed it into a formidable European power. But war isn't cheap. Each campaign drained the treasury, and Catherine had to juggle military ambitions with economic realities. The cost of war was steep, but for Catherine, the dividends in prestige were worth every kopeck. As we navigate the intricacies of Catherine's reign, it's clear that her legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of reform, ambition, and complexity. She was a ruler who danced the line between tradition and innovation, wielding power with a blend of charm and shrewdness that would make Machiavelli tip his hat. Catherine the Great was not just an empress. She was a force of nature, a woman who reshaped Russia's landscape and left an indelible mark on history. The tale of Catherine's reign is far from over. We've only scratched the surface of her expansive rule, with more layers to unravel in the story of Russia's transformation. The Empress's saga continues, a testament to the power of vision, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of greatness in an era of uncertainty and change. Stay tuned as we explore more of Catherine's legacy, from the challenges of governance to the intricacies of court life and beyond. The Empress's journey is far from its final chapter, and the best is yet to come. As we continue to peel back the layers of Catherine the Great's saga, let's pivot to a topic as juicy as a ripe orchard, her personal life. Yes, folks, we're diving headfirst into the royal gossip mill, where passions and politics were as intertwined as headphones in your pocket. Catherine's romantic escapades are the stuff of legend, but before we get swept away in tales of candlelit rendezvous and whispered sweet nothings, let's set the record straight. First off, Catherine wasn't just a hopeless romantic skipping through the corridors of the Winter Palace with love in her eyes. Nope, her love life was a strategic chessboard where every move was calculated and every night had a purpose. To call Catherine's relationships mere flings would be like calling the Russian winter a bit chilly. Each liaison was a carefully curated alliance, a mix of affection and astute politicking. Let's start with one of her most infamous relationships, Grigory Orlov. Now, here's a name that pops up like a jack-in-the-box whenever Catherine's love life is discussed. Orlov, a dashing officer of the Imperial Guard, wasn't just eye candy. He was instrumental in the 1762 coup that put Catherine on the throne. Talk about a power couple. Their relationship wasn't just about romance. It was a blend of mutual benefit and genuine affection. Catherine rewarded Orlov with titles and wealth, but he gave her loyalty, and let's be honest, a touch of excitement in a life otherwise dominated by droning bureaucrats. But Catherine's heart was like a well-read novel, complex and full of plot twists. Enter Grigory Potemkin, another key player on Catherine's romantic roster. Potemkin was more than a lover. He was a confidant, a partner in crime, and some say even her secret husband. Whether they tied the knot is still debated, but what's undeniable is their deep bond. Potemkin was a political powerhouse, helping Catherine expand Russian territories and solidify her rule. If Orlov was the knight in shining armor, Potemkin was the kingmaker with a strategic mind as sharp as a Cossack's saber. Catherine's relationship with Potemkin embodies the perfect blend of love and power politics. Together, they orchestrated the colonization of Crimea, a move as bold as it was controversial. They didn't just conquer lands, they orchestrated a geopolitical ballet that expanded Russia's influence. Potemkin's name is synonymous with the Potemkin village myth, a tale of sham settlements built to impress Catherine during her 1787 tour. The reality, Potemkin was more concerned with genuine development than fanciful facades. The myth persists, but the truth is Catherine had the savvy to see through illusions, focusing on tangible power plays. Now, let's bust some myths about Catherine's love life that history has turned into juicy, if inaccurate, tidbits. The most infamous of these is the apocryphal tale of Catherine's alleged equine escapades, a salacious rumor spread by her enemies to tarnish her legacy. It's pure fiction, as believable as unicorns galloping through the hermitage. This myth underscores the lengths to which detractors went to undermine a powerful woman in a patriarchal world. Catherine's real-life romances were scandalous enough without inventing tall tales. Catherine's liaisons weren't just personal affairs, they were political statements. Each lover was a potential ally or asset, someone who could bolster her position or implement her policies. It's easy to romanticize her relationships, but the reality is they were as much about strategy as they were about passion. In a male-dominated court, Catherine used her romantic entanglements to gain allies, secure military support, and stabilize her reign. Her love life was a tool of statecraft, a weapon in her imperial arsenal. However, this doesn't mean Catherine was a cold-hearted calculator. She was a woman of deep emotions, yearning for companionship and understanding in a world where trust was a rare commodity. Her correspondence with lovers reveals a woman who was both shrewd and vulnerable, capable of great affection and equally great political maneuvering. Catherine's balance between personal desires and imperial duties was a tightrope walk, one she managed with the grace of a seasoned acrobat. The economic backdrop of Catherine's romantic escapades is just as intriguing. Her affairs often involved generous gifts and titles, a kind of feudal dowry that strengthened personal bonds while reinforcing her economic network. The financial aspect of her relationships can't be overlooked. These were alliances built on a foundation of wealth and influence. In the grand tapestry of Catherine's reign, money was both a lubricant and a glue, smoothing over potential frictions and cementing loyalties. Catherine's ability to juggle her personal passions with the demands of empire is nothing short of remarkable. She was a ruler who wore many hats: empress, lover, reformer, and strategist. Her life was a constant balancing act, a testament to her adaptability and keen understanding of human nature. Catherine's romantic entanglements were a microcosm of her larger political strategy, reflecting her ability to navigate the complex social and political currents of her time. In the grand scheme of things, Catherine's love life was more than just a series of romantic interludes. It was a reflection of her political acumen, her ability to forge alliances, and her understanding of power dynamics. Each relationship was a thread in the intricate tapestry of her reign, a testament to her ability to wield personal and political influence with equal skill. As we continue to unravel the story of Catherine the Great, it's clear that her personal life was as complex and multifaceted as her political career. Her ability to balance personal desires with the demands of empire is a lesson in the art of statecraft, a reminder that power is as much about the heart as it is about the throne. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into Catherine's reign, exploring the challenges, triumphs, and legacies that defined her as one of history's most formidable rulers. The Empress's journey is far from over, and the best is yet to come. As Catherine the Great's life unfolded with all its personal intricacies, political maneuverings, and reformist zeal, the world watched as she not only wore the crown, but also transformed it into a symbol of Russia's burgeoning power. Despite all the drama and intrigue that surrounded her reign, Catherine managed to cement her legacy as a ruler whose influence extended far beyond the walls of the Winter Palace. But how exactly did she secure her place in history as great amidst the scandals, controversies, and the ever-watchful eye of European courts? Let's dive into the irony of Catherine's posthumous reputation, which is as layered as a Russian nesting doll. On the surface, she was the Enlightenment Empress, a beacon of reform and intellect. Yet, beneath this veneer lay a ruler who had to navigate the murky waters of scandal and political strife. Her reign was marked by a blend of progressive policies and the harsh realities of maintaining an empire that was as vast as it was diverse. Catherine's legacy is a testament to her ability to juggle these contradictions with finesse. She took the reins of a country that was still licking its wounds from the disarray left by Peter Roman III, and transformed it into a formidable player on the European stage. Her domestic policies, while often criticized, laid the groundwork for modernization. For instance, her expansion of the Russian Empire wasn't just about adding land to the map. It was about strategic positioning in the geopolitical chess game of the 18th century. Under her watch, Russia's territory expanded significantly, making her reign a period of unprecedented growth. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's approach to greatness wasn't without its controversies. Her flirtation with Enlightenment ideals often clashed with the grim reality of serfdom, which remained a blight on her otherwise progressive image. The Pugashev Rebellion of 1773-75, a massive uprising of serfs and Cossacks, was a stark reminder that beneath the polished surface of her reforms lay a social structure teetering on the edge of chaos. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, but it underscored the limitations and contradictions of her rule. It's a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, with Catherine promoting Enlightenment philosophies while maintaining an iron grip on her subjects. Despite these contradictions, Catherine's reign was undeniably transformative. She initiated a cultural renaissance that brought Western ideas and arts to Russia, fostering an intellectual climate that would influence generations. Her correspondence with luminaries like Voltaire and Diderot, though sometimes more about appearances than genuine reform, helped position Russia as a center of cultural and intellectual exchange. The Russian nobility, once more concerned with local feuds, began to see themselves as part of a broader European tapestry, thanks in no small part to Catherine's vision. Economically, Catherine was no slouch either. Her reign saw the establishment of new towns, the promotion of trade, and the encouragement of industry, all of which helped to bolster the Russian economy. By the end of her reign, Russia's foreign trade had increased by over 50%, a testament to her forward-thinking policies. Granted, much of this economic prosperity came at the expense of the lower classes, but it set the stage for Russia's eventual industrialization. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myths and legends that have come to define Catherine's legacy. The tales of her voracious romantic life, while titillating, often overshadow her genuine political achievements. The infamous horse myth, for instance, is nothing more than a smear campaign, a reflection of the lengths to which her detractors would go to undermine a powerful woman. It's a reminder that history is often written by those with an agenda, and the truth can be as elusive as a Russian winter sun. So, what does it mean to be great in the context of history? Catherine's greatness wasn't just about her accomplishments. It was about her ability to adapt, to navigate the treacherous waters of power with a deft hand. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of ambition, intellect, and political savvy. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but her imperfections are what make her story so compelling. She was a ruler who understood that greatness is often a blend of vision and pragmatism, of ideals and reality. Catherine's reign set the stage for future leaders, offering a blueprint for balancing reform with the harsh realities of governance. Her ability to maintain power in a male-dominated world, to enact change while preserving stability, is a lesson in the art of statecraft. As we reflect on her legacy, it's clear that Catherine's greatness lies not in the myths that surround her, but in the tangible impact she had on Russia and the world. In conclusion, Catherine the Great's life is a study in contrasts, a tale of ambition and adaptability set against the backdrop of a rapidly changing world. Her legacy is a testament to the power of vision and the complexities of leadership, a reminder that greatness is often a journey rather than a destination. As we bid farewell to the Empress and her remarkable story, let's remember her not just as a figure of legend, but as a ruler who, for better or worse, left an indelible mark on history. And if there's one thing we can take away from her reign, it's that the pursuit of greatness is as much about navigating the shadows as it is about basking in the light. Julius Caesar, the man who would one day become the face of Roman ambition, started his political career with a bang, or perhaps more accurately, a whimper of debt. Before he was the conqueror of Gaul, Caesar was a young noble with a hunger for power and a knack for spending money he didn't have. The year was 63 BCE, and the Roman political scene was a swirling mess of alliances and backstabbing. Caesar was elected as Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman state religion, not through divine intervention, but through sheer audacity and a ton of borrowed cash. He was in debt to the tune of 20 million sesterces. To put that in context for you, that's like owing Jeff Bezos money and hoping he doesn't notice. But as it turns out, a little thing like crippling debt was just a stepping stone for Caesar. He had this uncanny ability to turn adversity into opportunity, like some ancient alchemist who spun political lead into gold. He did this through a mix of charm, cunning, and a willingness to make deals with anyone who could advance his status. One such deal was with Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. who was known for his motto: "You can never have too much money or too many fires to put out." Crassus was famous for his real estate investments, especially his strategy of buying burning buildings and then sending in his own fire brigade. No kidding. Crassus had his own reasons for supporting Caesar. Mainly, he wanted someone in power who owed him a favor. So he backed Caesar's election as aedile, which in Roman terms was the guy responsible for organizing public games and events. Caesar, ever the showman, threw such lavish games that he put himself even deeper into debt, but he also won the love of the Roman populace. He was essentially the ancient world's answer to a social media influencer, gaining followers by throwing epic parties and gladiator games. Caesar's big break came when he was elected consul in 59 BCE. But let's face it, in Rome, being a consul was like being a co-CEO of a company that was always on the brink of hostile takeover. It was a one-year gig, and you had to share it with another guy. Caesar's partner in this little enterprise was Bibulus, a man whose most noteworthy achievement might have been hiding from Caesar's political storm by claiming he saw bad omens every time things got heated. It was a year where Caesar showed his genius for political maneuvering. He teamed up with Pompey the Great, and you guessed it, Crassus, forming the first triumvirate, a powerhouse alliance that was less a formal government and more a private club of the Roman elite. Now, about that collision course with the Gallic tribes. As soon as Caesar's year as consul was up, he was appointed proconsul of Gaul, both Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, and Transalpine Gaul, southern France. This wasn't just a cushy retirement plan. It was a strategic move. The Senate was basically throwing him a bone, hoping he'd spend a few years out of their hair, managing provincial affairs. But Caesar saw Gaul not as a backwater to be governed, but as a land ripe for conquest. He had a vision, to expand Roman territory, and more importantly, his own reputation. To do this, he needed both military glory and the wealth that came with it. Gaul was the perfect target. It was rich in resources, strategically located, and full of tribes that weren't exactly keen on becoming Roman citizens. The Helvetii, for instance, were already causing trouble, planning a mass migration that would upset the delicate balance of power in the region. Caesar's solution was to march his legions into Gaul under the guise of defending Rome's interests. The truth, he was building a personal empire. In 58 BCE, he defeated the Helvetii and then turned his attention to Ariovistus, a Germanic king whose presence in Gaul was like a thorn in Rome's side. Caesar's victories were swift and decisive, and each triumph added to his legend. But it wasn't just about the battles. Caesar wrote his own commentaries on the Gallic wars, turning the whole campaign into a PR triumph. He was like the ancient world's answer to an Instagram influencer, carefully curating his public image. His accounts were full of valor, strategy, and of course, his own heroics. And while the people of Rome were reading about his exploits, the Senate was getting worried. Caesar was gaining too much power, and they knew it. Yet, for every victory and every new territory added to the Roman fold, Caesar was also amassing wealth, enough to pay off his debts, and then some. He was no longer the young noble scrambling for cash, but a military leader with the resources to challenge even the most established Roman institutions. He was playing a dangerous game, one that put him on a collision course, not just with the Gallic tribes, but with the Roman Senate itself. So, while Caesar was out there conquering Gaul and writing his own legacy, back in Rome, his enemies were gathering. They had no idea just how much of a storm was brewing. Caesar's rise to power was a masterclass in political maneuvering, a testament to his ability to turn every setback into a stepping stone. It was this combination of ambition, military skill, and a little bit of luck that propelled him to the heights of power and set the stage for one of history's most storied conflicts. But that's a tale for another time. Caesar's rise was the stuff of legends, but let's not get carried away with the fairy tale. Once he set his sights on Gaul, the real work began, and it wasn't all glory and laurels. This was where Caesar's military genius truly shone, especially in his use of engineering and deception. You see, the Gallic wars weren't just about who had the bigger army. They were a chess game played on a bloody battlefield. And Caesar, he was the grandmaster. Take the Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE, for instance. This wasn't your average skirmish. It was a showdown for the ages. Vercingetorix, the charismatic leader of the Gallic tribes, had holed up in the fortified city of Alesia, surrounded by a vast army. Most generals would have thrown in the towel, but not Caesar. He decided to besiege Alesia, a move that was as audacious as it was risky. His troops built a circumvallation, a ring of fortifications around the city, spanning over 18 kilometers. If that wasn't enough, he constructed a second ring of defenses facing outward, anticipating a Gallic relief force. Picture this. Caesar's army was trapped between two enemies, inside and out, and yet he was the one doing the trapping. This was engineering and strategy on steroids, but here's where it gets really wild. The relief force, numbering anywhere from 60,000 to 250,000, depending on which ancient source you believe, did show up. That meant Caesar's 50,000 men were outnumbered on both sides. Yet through tactical brilliance, and perhaps a touch of desperation, Caesar's forces repelled attack after attack. His legions, hardened by years of campaigning, executed flawless maneuvers and held their ground. As for Vercingetorix, he was left with no choice but to surrender, his grand coalition of tribes crumbling like a poorly baked soufflé. This victory was improbable, to say the least, and it cemented Caesar's reputation as a military mastermind. Now, let's talk logistics. Keeping an army fed and clothed in the hostile wilds of Gaul was no small feat. Roman legions were like the ancient world's version of a rock band on tour. They needed a lot of support. Each legionary carried about 27 kilograms of gear, including weapons, armor, and personal belongings. They had to march up to 30 kilometers a day, which burned through resources faster than a gladiator through a pitcher of wine. To manage this, Caesar relied on the Roman military machine's efficiency. He established supply lines and storage depots, ensuring his troops had access to grain, which was their staple diet. And let's not forget the local contributions he extracted from Gallic territories, a nice way of saying he took what he needed, often at sword point. This was Caesar's version of crowdsourcing logistics, and it wasn't exactly popular among the locals. Budgeting for a campaign like this was a balancing act worthy of an Olympic gymnast. The Roman state provided some funding, but Caesar also dipped into his own coffers. Let's not forget those debts he had back in Rome. Conquests were expected to turn a profit, and Caesar was counting on the spoils of war to pay off creditors and line his own pockets. Spoiler alert, it worked. By the end of his campaigns, Caesar wasn't just solvent, he was wealthy beyond measure. The Senate might have been clutching their pearls about his growing power, but Caesar was laughing all the way to his new, fortified bank account. But why go through all this trouble? For Caesar, Gaul was a stepping stone to ultimate power. Military victories equaled political clout, and he was playing a long game. Each conquered tribe, each vanquished foe was another feather in his helmet, another tale for the bards to sing. It wasn't just about the land or the riches, it was about the reputation. In Rome, image was everything, and Caesar was crafting his with the precision of a master sculptor. Of course, the realities of the Gallic wars weren't all glory and grand narratives. For the Roman soldiers, it was a grueling, bloody business. Casualties were high, and the conditions brutal. But Caesar's charisma and leadership kept his legions loyal. They followed him not just because they had to, but because they believed in him. And that, perhaps, was his greatest weapon. So, while Caesar was out there orchestrating victories and riding his own legend, he was also laying the groundwork for something much bigger. The Senate's fears weren't unfounded. Caesar's growing power was a threat to the status quo, and the political landscape of Rome was shifting under their sandals. But for now, let's leave Caesar reveling in his triumphs, with the Gallic wars etched into history as a testament to his audacious genius. Just remember, the next chapters of this saga are waiting in the wings, and if you think this was dramatic, just wait. As Caesar basked in the glow of his Gallic conquests, he was busy crafting a narrative so shiny, you'd need sunglasses to read it. You see, Julius Caesar wasn't just a general. He was a PR savant who could sell sand in the Sahara. His weapon of choice, the power of the written word. Caesar penned the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, a series of dispatches that were less about day-to-day accounts and more about spinning a tale of Roman valor and his own brilliance. These writings were Caesar's way of playing the ancient version of a social media influencer, except instead of selfies and hashtags, he used scrolls and scribes. Let's dive into these commentaries. On the surface, they seem like straightforward military reports, but the subtext is as rich as a Roman senator's toga. Caesar wrote in the third person, lending his accounts an air of objectivity, like he was merely a humble narrator chronicling events, rather than the star of the show. This was Caesar's masterstroke. By removing himself from the first-person narrative, he made his exploits seem like universally accepted truths rather than a personal bragfest. Caesar's commentaries were distributed back in Rome, and they were like catnip for the Roman public. The tales of courage, discipline, and Roman superiority were just the kind of bedtime stories that made citizens sleep easier, dreaming of their empire's unstoppable rise. But let's not kid ourselves. These accounts were as much about reality as a Hollywood blockbuster. They conveniently glossed over the gritty details, like the slog of trudging through muddy battlefields or the less than glamorous logistics of feeding an army in hostile territory. Consider this. The Commentarii described Gallic tribes as barbaric hordes, vast and menacing, which justified Rome's civilizing campaigns. Yet the truth was more nuanced. Many of these tribes had their own complex societies and systems of governance, but Caesar's narrative painted a picture that aligned with Roman prejudices and political goals, conquest under the guise of bringing order and civilization. It was propaganda dressed up as reportage, and it worked like a charm. Now, while Caesar was busy elevating his legend, his soldiers were living a very different reality. Imagine being a Roman legionary. You're in Gaul, which might as well have been Mars for all the familiarity it had with Rome. You're enduring harsh winters, endless marches, and the ever-present threat of skirmishes. Your diet, mostly grain, with the occasional meat when fortune smiled or a village surrendered. The glamour of conquest was lost on these men, who often faced grueling conditions and a high chance of becoming a casualty statistic. Caesar's charisma, however, was a potent morale booster. His ability to inspire loyalty was legendary, a trait that kept his legions cohesive despite the hardships. He was known to march with his troops, share their rations, and even address them personally at times. This wasn't just leadership. It was a calculated move to ensure his soldiers would follow him anywhere, even as they waded through the muck of Gallic campaigns. The contrast between Caesar's polished narratives and the soldiers' gritty experiences is stark. Yet, the myth of Caesar the hero required such embellishments. Without them, he was just another Roman general, albeit a talented one, slogging through the mud with his army. But with his commentaries, he became a living legend, the embodiment of Roman virtues and the bane of barbarian resistance. It was a narrative so compelling, it's been retold for centuries, outlasting even the Roman Empire itself. Back in Rome, Caesar's dispatches were eagerly read by the populace and the Senate alike. They offered a glimpse into his campaigns, and whether they loved him or loathed him, everyone was riveted by the unfolding drama. The Senate, however, was starting to see the writing on the wall, or rather, the scrolls. Caesar's growing power and popularity posed a threat to the established order. His commentaries weren't just stories, they were a power play, a way to keep his name and exploits on everyone's lips. The idea of a charismatic leader using media to shape public perception isn't exactly new, but Caesar was a pioneer. His dispatches were not just military reports. They were a carefully curated image of Roman might and his own indispensability. And while his soldiers fought and bled in the muddy fields of Gaul, Caesar was laying the groundwork for a political career that would shake the very foundations of Rome. Yet, let's not ignore the reality that his soldiers faced. While Caesar's narratives painted a picture of glorious conquest, the real story was one of brutal campaigns and relentless discipline. Roman legions were tough, but the conditions were tougher. They built fortifications, dug trenches, and engaged in hand-to-hand combat, often at great personal risk. These men were the unsung heroes of Caesar's campaigns, their sacrifices the price of his soaring legend. The disparity between Caesar's polished reports and the soldiers' gritty reality speaks volumes about the power of narrative. While the legions were the muscle behind Rome's conquests, it was Caesar's pen that immortalized them. This duality is what makes history so fascinating, a blend of myth and reality, where the truth often lies somewhere in between. As Caesar continued to spin his tales and solidify his legacy, the stage was set for even greater ambitions. The Senate's unease was growing, and the political landscape was shifting under the weight of Caesar's expanding influence. But for now, let's leave our hero basking in his triumphs, with the knowledge that his story is far from over. The next chapters are poised to unravel with even more intrigue and drama, so stay tuned as we continue to explore how Julius Caesar, the master of narrative, reshaped the world around him with both sword and pen. Just as Julius Caesar was perfecting his role as the ancient world's ultimate self-promo artist, his exploits in Gaul were starting to cast long shadows back in Rome. The Senate, a group known for their love of tradition, and I don't mean toga parties, began to realize that Caesar's growing influence was less a wave and more a tsunami threatening to wash over them. Picture the scene. A bunch of toga-clad politicians sweating under the Mediterranean sun, trying to figure out how to reign in a man who was quickly becoming larger than life. Caesar's victories in Gaul had transformed him from a cash-strapped noble to a military rock star with legions of fans, and I mean that quite literally. His soldiers were fanatically loyal, not just because he paid them well, but because he had this uncanny ability to make them feel like they were part of something bigger. But back in Rome, the Senate was less impressed with his charisma and more concerned about his ambitions. If Caesar was the headliner, the senators were the opening act, and they knew their time in the spotlight was fading fast. Let's break it down economically, because nothing says political tension like a little financial pressure. Caesar's conquests, while lucrative, were also expensive. The spoils of war were like a treasure chest with a double-edged sword. On one hand, there's gold, silver, slaves, and enough loot to make a pirate blush. On the other, there's the cost of maintaining an army, rebuilding after battles, and oh yes, dealing with the implications of expanding an empire's borders. Rome's treasury, already stretched, wasn't exactly loving the fiscal hangover that came from Caesar's ambitions. Now, the Gallic territories weren't just about land and resources. They were about reshaping the economic landscape of Rome itself. Caesar's campaigns opened up new trade routes, bringing in a flood of wealth that was both a blessing and a curse. The influx of riches led to inflation, and while the elite were busy counting their coins, the average Roman citizen was dealing with prices that felt like a bad joke. Bread and circuses only go so far when the cost of living is skyrocketing. Back in the Senate, Caesar's popularity was a problem that needed solving. The senators, a crafty bunch, decided on a classic political maneuver: bring him back to Rome and strip him of his command. But Caesar, never one to walk into a trap, saw through their plan. He was like a chess player who could see 10 moves ahead, and he knew that returning to Rome without his army was akin to walking into the lion's den wearing a stake necklace. The crux of the matter was simple. Caesar needed to maintain his power base, and the Senate needed to stop him before he became the Roman Empire's version of a one-man show. The solution? A civil war. It was a dramatic, bloody affair that would make even the most hardened gladiator wince. But before we get to the nitty-gritty of that epic showdown, let's pause to appreciate the economic subtext. Caesar's campaigns weren't just military conquests. They were economic gambits that reshaped the Roman world. The wealth from Gaul didn't just pay off his debts. It allowed him to bankroll his future ambitions. With riches at his disposal, Caesar wasn't just a threat to the political order. He was a financial juggernaut. His ability to fund his own army meant he was no longer beholden to Rome's purse strings, a fact that made the Senate's collective blood pressure spike. The political fallout from Caesar's Gallic triumphs was as much about economics as it was about power. The Senate's attempts to curtail his influence were hampered by the fact that Caesar was, quite literally, buying his way into history. And while the senators were wringing their hands, Caesar was plotting his next move, one that would shake the foundations of Rome and set the stage for a new era. As tensions reached a boiling point, the stage was set for a showdown that would become the stuff of legend. The Senate's attempts to call Caesar back to Rome without his troops were met with a defiant crossing of the Rubicon River, a move that screamed checkmate in a game where the stakes were nothing less than the future of Rome itself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The civil war loomed on the horizon like a storm cloud pregnant with chaos, and the economic implications were as vast as they were complex. Caesar's ambition was a costly business, one that left its mark on Rome's treasury and the Gallic territories alike. The spoils of war were a double-edged sword, and the cost of Caesar's rise was a price that would echo through the ages. In the end, the political fallout from Caesar's conquests in Gaul wasn't just about one man's ambition. It was a seismic shift in the Roman world, a tale of power, wealth, and the ever-persistent pull of destiny. As Caesar prepared to face the Senate's challenge, the story of Rome was about to enter a new chapter, one written in the ink of ambition and the blood of conflict. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over, and the next act promises to be a dramatic tour de force that will redefine what it means to be a Roman. The stage was set for Julius Caesar to turn his sights back to Rome, a city that was just about ready to greet him with a mix of awe and anxiety. Caesar, fresh from his conquests in Gaul, wasn't just bringing back tales of military glory. He was hauling a boatload of wealth and a reputation that sparkled brighter than the Roman Forum on a sunny day. But here's the kicker. He wasn't exactly coming home to a welcome parade. Instead, he was marching straight into the political equivalent of a hornet's nest, with the Senate buzzing with nerves and no small amount of resentment. Caesar's return in 49 BCE was anything but a simple homecoming. By crossing the Rubicon River with his legions, a move as subtle as a sledgehammer, Caesar essentially declared war on the Roman Senate. The phrase, crossing the Rubicon, has since become shorthand for passing the point of no return, and Caesar was about to make history by doing just that. With a single act of defiance, he showed the Senate that he wasn't about to play by their rules. And let's face it, in a city where political maneuvering was the favorite sport, Caesar was the one rewriting the playbook. This wasn't just a power grab, it was a seismic shift in Roman politics. The Roman Republic, with its intricate system of checks and balances, was about to be tested like never before. Caesar was playing a high-stakes game, and the chips he was betting weren't just his own future, but the very structure of Roman governance. The Senate, understandably, was in a tizzy. With Caesar's legions marching toward Rome, it was clear that the balance of power was teetering on a knife's edge. The ensuing civil war was a whirlwind of battles, betrayals, and political drama that could rival any modern-day thriller. It was a clash not just of armies, but of ideologies, republicanism versus autocracy. Caesar, with his charismatic leadership and military prowess, had the upper hand, but his path wasn't exactly paved with rose petals. He faced opposition both on the battlefield and in the corridors of power, with key figures like Pompey the Great standing as his most formidable adversary. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and a member of the first triumvirate, was now leading the charge against him. It's like watching a buddy cop film where the partners suddenly find themselves on opposite sides of the law. The Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE was the climax of this personal and political rivalry. Caesar, despite being outnumbered, pulled off a stunning victory, a testament to his tactical genius. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he met a rather undignified end, leaving Caesar as the undisputed power in Rome. But hold your horses before you start thinking of Caesar as the ultimate hero. His rise to power was as much about ruthlessness as it was about brilliance. This wasn't a Disney movie. It was Roman reality, with all its gritty complexity. Caesar's consolidation of power marked the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic. His appointment as Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, was the final nail in the coffin for Republican ideals. It was a move that cemented his authority, but also sowed the seeds of his downfall. The Ides of March, 44 BCE, is the infamous day when Caesar's ambition finally caught up with him. A group of senators, fearing the loss of their own power, decided that enough was enough. They stabbed him 23 times in a brutal assassination that has been dramatized in countless retellings. But the reality behind the myth is both more mundane and more profound. The conspirators weren't just driven by personal vendettas. They were reacting to the broader implications of Caesar's rule, the erosion of republican freedoms, and the rise of autocratic power. So, what are we left with when we strip away the layers of legend and look at the man himself? Julius Caesar was a complex figure, a blend of visionary leader and ambitious autocrat. His conquests in Gaul and his subsequent rise to power were not just about military might. They were about reshaping the political landscape of Rome. He was a reformer who introduced sweeping changes, from reorganizing the calendar to expanding citizenship. Yet, his reforms were overshadowed by his pursuit of absolute power. Caesar's legacy is a paradox. On one hand, he was a military genius whose campaigns in Gaul expanded Roman territory and brought immense wealth to the empire. On the other hand, his actions set in motion the downfall of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire under his heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus. The transition from republic to empire was a monumental shift, one that changed the course of history. Caesar's life and death became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fragility of democratic institutions. But let's not forget the allure of the myth. Caesar's story is one of charisma and conquest, a saga of a man who rose from debt-ridden beginnings to become the most powerful figure in the ancient world. His narrative is both a celebration of ambition and a warning against the perils of power. It's a story that continues to resonate, influencing our understanding of leadership and authority even today. In the end, Julius Caesar's impact is undeniable. He was a leader who embodied both the best and worst of Roman society, a man who could inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. His life was a testament to the complexities of human nature and the intricate dance of power and politics. As we wrap up this tale, remember that history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of shades and nuances, where the truth often lies somewhere between the legend and the reality. In the dusty annals of history, there's a well-trodden path leading to the legendary figure of Saladin, the Sultan who famously reclaimed Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187. But before he was the man who could make kings tremble, Saladin was just a kid from Tikrit, a town that even today struggles to get a decent mention outside of being Saddam Hussein's birthplace. Born in 1137 to a Kurdish family that was about as obscure as a band playing at a dive bar on a Tuesday night, Saladin's early years didn't scream future world leader. His real name, by the way, was letter 1E63, L.A. Macron letter 1E25, ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. Try fitting that on a medieval business card. The 12th century Middle East was a hotbed of political intrigue, a Game of Thrones episode that never ended. At the time, the region was a patchwork quilt of squabbling states, warlords, and the occasional ambitious empire builder. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad was more like a tired landlord trying to manage unruly tenants than a commanding empire. Meanwhile, the Fatimids in Egypt were hanging on by a thread, think Titanic, but with more camels and no Celine Dion soundtrack. Amidst this chaos, young Saladin found himself in the service of Nur ad-Din, the ruler of Damascus and Aleppo, a guy whose idea of fun was expanding his territory and keeping the Crusaders on their toes. Now, Saladin's rise in Nur ad-Din's service wasn't exactly a meteoric ascent. If he had a LinkedIn profile back then, it would probably say something like, aspiring soldier, currently fetching coffee for the emir's advisors. But Saladin was nothing if not persistent. He spent his youth learning the ropes, even if it meant enduring the medieval equivalent of office politics, where instead of passive-aggressive post-it notes, you'd likely face real daggers. One of the great myths of Saladin's life is that he was a born military genius. In reality, his early military career was more of a comedy of errors. There's an old story, possibly apocryphal, but who cares? It's hilarious, about Saladin falling off his horse during a skirmish, only to land in a heap of mud. His comrades reportedly laughed so hard that the enemy, confused by the cackling, thought they'd accidentally invaded a circus. These kinds of blunders didn't exactly scream future Sultan, but they did teach Saladin a valuable lesson, humility, and perhaps the importance of staying in the saddle. The political landscape that Saladin navigated was as treacherous as it was absurd. Consider the time when the Fatimid Caliphate, sitting precariously in Egypt, decided to ally with the Crusaders against Nur ad-Din. It's like watching two neighborhood cats team up against a particularly annoying dog, except these cats had armies and a penchant for betrayal. Saladin, sent by Nur ad-Din to stabilize the situation in Egypt, found himself caught in the middle of this mess. He had to play both sides, just to keep his head attached to his shoulders, and somehow managed to turn the whole debacle to his advantage. Saladin's early years weren't just defined by military blunders and political intrigue. There's a delightful story about a young Saladin being so bored at a diplomatic meeting that he started doodling on a scroll. When one of the senior advisors caught him, Saladin quickly turned the doodles into a map of a hypothetical kingdom. The advisor, amused, remarked, "Dreaming of conquest, are we?" To which Saladin allegedly replied, "Just planning ahead." Whether this exchange happened or not, it captures the essence of a young man whose imagination often outpaced his reality. Of course, there are always those who romanticize Saladin's rise as a destined path, a tale of fate and fortune. But let's not kid ourselves. Saladin's journey from Tikrit to the throne was as much a product of luck and timing as it was of skill and ambition. The Middle East in the 12th century was a place where the right combination of circumstance and cunning could catapult even a Kurdish kid with a knack for not taking himself too seriously into the annals of history. So there you have it, the early years of Saladin, a kid with big dreams, a knack for getting into the right kind of trouble, and a world around him that was as chaotic as it was ripe for opportunity. It just goes to show that every legend starts somewhere, often with a face full of mud and a laugh at life's absurdities. Now, let's fast forward a bit from Saladin's mud-splattered escapades to when he started to get, well, less muddy and a bit more legendary. By 1169, Saladin found himself with a shiny new title, Vizier of Egypt. Quite the upgrade from fetching coffee, huh? This was a position that came with its own set of headaches, mainly because Egypt was like a medieval version of a fixer-upper house, just with more masks and fewer plumbing problems. Egypt at this time was like a financial black hole. The Fatimid Caliphate was in shambles, their treasury emptier than a soda can at a frat party. The Caliphate's annual revenue was estimated at around 750,000 dinars, which might sound like a lot, but let's just say that running a state on that budget was like trying to fuel a jet engine with a can of beans. Saladin had to be more than just a warrior. He had to be an accountant, economist, and miracle worker rolled into one. Here's where we start seeing some of his so-called genius. He knew that to conquer, you needed cash, and to get cash, you needed to be creative. So, he embarked on a bit of medieval austerity, cutting down unnecessary expenses, reforming the tax system, and making sure the money that came in didn't immediately disappear into the pockets of corrupt officials. It's not the kind of thing that gets you romanticized in history, but hey, it worked. Now, let's talk logistics, because conquering Egypt wasn't just about strategy. It was also about supply chains and keeping your army fed and happy. Saladin understood that an army marches on its stomach, and if you've ever been hangry, you know that keeping troops well fed is crucial. He established supply lines and ensured that provisions could be transported efficiently across the harsh desert terrain. Imagine trying to coordinate a medieval version of Uber Eats across miles of nothing but sand and sun. Now that's impressive, but here's where the spin doctors come in. The tale of Saladin's conquest of Egypt is often painted as a noble campaign filled with chivalric ideals. In reality, it was as much about backroom deals and strategic marriages as it was about battlefield bravery. Saladin knew how to play the political game. He married the widow of his predecessor, a move that was less about romance and more about solidifying his claim to power. Think of it as the ultimate power couple move. Less happily ever after, and more let's consolidate our assets. And oh, those battles. The romanticized accounts would have you believe that Saladin's campaigns were epic clashes of good versus evil, where he gallantly led the charge. But honestly, medieval warfare was far from glamorous. It was brutal, bloody, and often downright dirty. Imagine the smell alone, armor, sweat, and the aftermath of medieval combat, not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. The truth is, Saladin's victories were as much about outsmarting his foes as they were about outfighting them. He was a master of psychological warfare, often winning battles before they even began. He understood the power of propaganda, using it to demoralize his enemies and rally his own troops. Saladin wasn't just fighting with swords. He was wielding words and rumors like weapons, too. Yet despite his strategic brilliance, Saladin was still human. He made mistakes, had doubts, and sometimes even failed. But what set him apart was his ability to learn from those failures and adapt. He wasn't a one-trick pony. He was a man who could pivot faster than you can say checkmate. That's the real secret to his success. Not some divine destiny or innate genius, but a relentless drive to improve and outthink his rivals. So, was Saladin the chivalrous hero that history often portrays? Well, yes and no. He was certainly a figure of immense charisma and intelligence, but he was also a product of his time, a time when survival often depended on being just as cunning as you were courageous. The myth and the man are intertwined. each illuminating different facets of a complex character who navigated the treacherous waters of medieval politics and warfare with skill and a fair bit of pragmatism. As we wrap up this chapter of Saladin's journey, it's clear that his transformation into a military leader was anything but straightforward. He was a man who understood that power wasn't just taken on the battlefield. It was built through careful planning, strategic alliances, and occasionally a bit of creative accounting. There's still much more to explore about Saladin's legacy, but for now, let's leave him here, a man on the rise, poised to become the legendary figure who would reshape the Middle East. And so, with Saladin poised to make his mark on history, we catapult into the chaos of 1187, where the stage is set for a showdown that would echo across the centuries, the Battle of Hattin. Now, if you're imagining a clash of knights in shining armor galloping across lush fields, let's reel that in a bit. This wasn't a jousting tournament with fancy pageantry. This was medieval warfare at its grittiest, and the reality was a lot less picturesque. The Crusader states were feeling the heat, literally. That summer, the Levant was harder than a jalapeno in a sauna, and the Crusaders, under the command of King Guy of Lusignan, were stuck in the frying pan. They made the questionable decision to march their forces across the arid plains towards Tiberias, aiming to relieve a garrison under siege by Saladin's forces. It was a classic case of haste makes waste, but in this case, the waste was their water supply. Saladin, ever the strategic genius with a side of cunning, knew exactly how to exploit this. He orchestrated what can only be described as an elaborate medieval version of psychological warfare. His troops set fires to the dry brush around the Crusaders' camp, effectively turning the area into a smoky oven. Imagine trying to fight in an inferno while choking on smoke and lacking so much as a sip of water. It's the kind of tactical maneuver that makes you realize Saladin was playing 4D chess while others were still figuring out checkers. But let's not get too carried away with the narrative of noble warfare. The Battle of Hattin wasn't about gallant knights and chivalric ideals. It was a brutal clash driven by desperation and survival. Saladin's forces, numbering around 30,000, encircled the Crusaders, who were down to about 20,000 and severely dehydrated. It wasn't long before the Crusader army crumbled like a cookie left in a hot car. The casualties were staggering. Nearly all of the Crusader infantry was killed or captured, and the remaining knights surrendered, including King Guy himself. The aftermath of Hattin was a game-changer, tilting the balance of power decisively in Saladin's favor. With the Crusader forces decimated, Saladin had a clear path to Jerusalem. Now, here's where the legend part kicks in. The story told in countless tales of Saladin's magnanimity and chivalry. The narrative goes that Saladin, in a show of mercy, offered King Guy iced sherbet to quench his thirst. After all, even medieval legends had a flair for the dramatic. But hold your horses, or in this case, your camels. The reality was far more complex. Saladin was indeed a shrewd leader who understood the value of mercy as a tool for political gain. By treating his captives with respect, he was sending a message to the Crusader states. Resistance is futile, but submission could be far less painful. It was a clever way to consolidate his power and secure his reputation, both in the Muslim world and beyond. With Jerusalem now within his grasp, Saladin's next move was to retake the Holy City. Here, the stories take on an almost mythical quality, with Saladin portrayed as a paragon of knightly virtue, an image crafted as much by his contemporaries as by later historians with a penchant for romanticizing the past. The capture of Jerusalem in October 1187 has often been depicted as a bloodless affair, a stark contrast to the Crusaders' own infamous sack of the city in 1099, where they left a trail of blood and destruction in their wake. In truth, Saladin's capture of Jerusalem was more a masterclass in negotiation than a thunderous military victory. The city, under the command of Balian of Ibelin, was prepared for a desperate last stand. But rather than storm the walls, Saladin opted for diplomacy. He negotiated a peaceful surrender, allowing the inhabitants to leave the city in exchange for a ransom. Those who couldn't pay were still allowed to depart, albeit under escort. It was a calculated decision, driven by strategic considerations as much as by any sense of chivalry. The economic implications of this move were significant. By allowing the Christians to leave largely unscathed, Saladin avoided the costly logistics of a prolonged siege and the potential damage to Jerusalem's infrastructure. And let's face it, a city that was still standing and functional was far more valuable than one reduced to rubble. This approach also helped burnish Saladin's image as a magnanimous conqueror, a narrative that suited him just fine. Saladin's actions in Jerusalem also highlight the pragmatic realities of medieval warfare. While the romanticized version of history paints him as a benevolent ruler, the truth was that his decisions were rooted in the harsh realities of maintaining power and ensuring stability in a volatile region. He knew that his hold on Jerusalem would be stronger if he could win over the local population and prevent further bloodshed. It was a strategy that paid dividends, reinforcing his status as a formidable leader and a skilled tactician. So, was Saladin the paragon of virtue that history often portrays? The answer, as always, lies somewhere in between. He was a man of his time, navigating a world where power was as much about perception as it was about military might. His generosity and chivalry, while genuine to a degree, were also tools in his arsenal, used to craft a legacy that would endure long after the dust of battle had settled. As we peel back the layers of legend and delve into the gritty details of Saladin's defining moments, one thing becomes clear. His story is not just about battles and conquests. It's about a leader who understood the complex interplay of power, politics, and perception. A man who, in a time of constant conflict, managed to carve out a legacy that would stand the test of time. And while the romanticized tales of his exploits may capture the imagination, it's the reality of his strategic brilliance and human complexity that truly cements his place in history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma that is Saladin, exploring the intricacies of his rule and the enduring impact of his legacy. Because, as we've seen, history is never as simple as it seems, and the stories we tell are often as much about the myths we create as the facts they contain. So, with the legacy of Hattin and Jerusalem casting its long shadow, we find Saladin not just basking in the glow of victory, but also wrestling with the tangled web of medieval politics. If you think modern-day diplomacy is a circus, wait till you hear about the 12th century, where alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. Saladin, ever the savvy operator, knew that the real challenge lay not just in conquering territories, but in holding them together in a region that was less united front and more dysfunctional family reunion. The Middle East at the time was a patchwork quilt of territories, each with its own unique set of problems and personalities. Picture a political landscape where shifting allegiances were the norm, and you'd need a scorecard just to keep track of who was on whose side this week. Saladin had to be less a sultan and more a master juggler, balancing the interests of his own Ayyubid dynasty with those of the Abbasid Caliphate and the various emirates that dotted the landscape. Now, you might think that diplomacy in the Middle Ages was all about grand gestures, but let's not kid ourselves. Behind the scenes, it was as gritty as it gets. Saladin's efforts to consolidate power often involved a delicate dance of carrots and sticks. Take, for example, his dealings with the once mighty Seljuks. By this time, the Seljuk Empire was more shell than substance, but their influence in the Islamic world was still significant. Saladin knew that a good relationship with them was key, so he played the long game, offering them a mix of respect and realpolitik. But not every diplomatic effort went off without a hitch. There were times when Saladin's attempts to keep the peace felt more like a comedy of errors. One such occasion involved the ambitious ruler of Mosul, Izz al-Din, who was something of a medieval frenemy. While Saladin aimed for a cordial alliance, Izz al-Din had his sights set on expanding his own domain. Their correspondence was a masterclass in passive-aggressive diplomacy, with Saladin writing polite letters that essentially said, "Hey, let's be friends," while Izz al-Din responded with, "Sure, but only if I get a piece of the pie." Saladin's strategy often involved strategic marriages, a reliable tool in the medieval diplomatic kit. He wasn't shy about using his family as pawns in the greater Game of Thrones. Marriages were arranged not out of love, but necessity, creating alliances that were as much about survival as they were about power. It's a bit like a medieval version of Survivor, where outlasting the competition often meant outwitting them with strategic partnerships. Yet, sometimes, even the best-laid plans went awry. Take the time when Saladin's efforts to marry off his sister to a prominent emir fell through in the most spectacular fashion. The story goes that the groom-to-be got cold feet, leaving Saladin to scramble for a plan B. The whole affair was a bit of an embarrassment, but it also underscored the unpredictable nature of medieval alliances. You could plan for everything, but human nature had a funny way of throwing a wrench into the works. Economic considerations were never far from Saladin's mind. After all, maintaining an empire isn't cheap, and Saladin understood that a stable economy was the backbone of a strong state. He implemented tax reforms to stabilize revenue streams, recognizing that squeezing his subjects too hard could lead to dissent. This was a man who knew that the key to a successful reign was making sure the coffers were full without inciting rebellion, a balancing act that would make even the most seasoned modern economist sweat. And let's not forget the religious dimension to Saladin's rule. As a devout Sunni Muslim, he had to navigate the often fraught relationships between different Islamic sects, particularly the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Fatimids in Cairo, a Shiite dynasty, had been a thorn in his side, and while Saladin had effectively dismantled their power base, he needed to ensure that the broader Sunni-Shiite divide didn't undermine his authority. It was a constant juggling act, requiring the kind of deft political footwork that would put Fred Astaire to shame. Saladin's diplomatic acumen shone brightly in his dealings with the Crusader states post-Hatton. Rather than opt for total annihilation, he negotiated truces and even allowed some Crusader forces to withdraw peacefully. This wasn't just a magnanimous gesture. It was a calculated move to prevent further unnecessary conflict and consolidate his gains without overextending his resources. In many ways, Saladin was a medieval maestro, conducting a complex symphony of diplomacy, economics, and military strategy. Of course, not every alliance was forged through negotiation and tact. Sometimes, power had to be asserted through more direct means. When rebellious factions within his own territories threatened stability, Saladin wasn't afraid to crack the whip. In one memorable instance, he had to march into Aleppo to assert his authority, reminding the recalcitrant emir that there was only room for one top dog in this kennel. As we peel back the layers of Saladin's diplomatic efforts, it becomes clear that his genius lay not just in his military prowess, but in his ability to navigate the labyrinthine politics of his time. He was a man who knew that the sword was often less powerful than the pen, and that real power lay in the ability to unite disparate factions under a common cause. In the end, Saladin's legacy as a diplomat is as compelling as his military achievements. He was a leader who understood that true strength came from unity, and that holding an empire together required more than just force of arms. His ability to forge alliances, manage resources, and maintain stability in a volatile landscape is a testament to his skill as a statesman. As we continue to explore the complexities of Saladin's rule, it's clear that the Sultan was a man of many talents, each one vital to his success. His story is a reminder that history is not just about battles and conquests, but about the intricate dance of diplomacy that underpins every great empire. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the saga of Saladin, and the best is yet to come. So, having navigated the labyrinth of medieval politics like a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos, Saladin's tale doesn't end with his diplomatic dexterity. Instead, it crescendos into a legacy that would echo through the annals of history, long after his death in 1193. Now, let's dive headlong into the aftermath of his mortal coil shuffle, where the myth of Saladin starts to crystallize into something almost as towering as the man himself. First off, let's dispel the notion that Saladin rode off into the sunset, leaving a utopia in his wake. The truth is, maintaining a sprawling empire back then was about as easy as juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. Saladin left behind a realm that was more patchwork quilt than seamless tapestry. His empire stretched from Egypt to Syria, a vast expanse that on paper looked impressive, but in reality was held together by the threads of loyalty and familial ties rather than ironclad governance. His death was like pulling the keystone from an arch. Things got wobbly fast. Saladin's successors, his sons and nephews, found themselves heir to a sultanate that was a veritable hotbed of potential insurrections. The Ayyubid dynasty, which Saladin had so meticulously stitched together, started to fray at the edges almost immediately. Picture a medieval version of a corporate takeover where the boardroom is your blood relatives, each with their own ideas about how to run the show. Unsurprisingly, disagreements flared up quicker than you could say, family feud. Yet despite these challenges, Saladin's legacy wasn't solely defined by the political squabbles that followed. His mythos grew, not just in the Middle East, but also among his former foes. In Europe, Saladin was regarded as the quintessential noble adversary, a sort of Muslim King Arthur, if you will. The romanticized tales of his chivalry and magnanimity became the stuff of legend, particularly in the chivalric romances that began to circulate. It's the kind of PR coup that would make modern spin doctors green with envy. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the narrative of Saladin as the chivalrous Sultan is endearing, it's only half the story. The real Saladin was a shrewd operator who understood the power of image. His acts of mercy and diplomacy were as much about bolstering his reputation as they were about genuine goodwill. In many ways, Saladin was a pre-modern master of branding, carefully curating his image to ensure his legacy would be one of a benevolent and just ruler. And it's this carefully crafted image that allowed his legend to endure. Even the chroniclers of the time, both Muslim and Christian, couldn't resist embellishing the story of a man who had bested the Crusaders and taken Jerusalem. The allure of Saladin lay in his ability to transcend the typical villain narratives of the era, becoming an icon of cultural and religious respect. He was the Sultan who could dine with kings and still command the respect of his own people, a delicate balancing act that few leaders have managed since. Yet the economic impact of his rule can't be underestimated either. Saladin's consolidation of power brought a degree of stability to the region, allowing for a period of economic growth that had begun under the Fatimids but expanded under his watch. His reforms in Egypt, particularly in terms of tax restructuring and the promotion of agriculture, laid the groundwork for a more sustainable economy. The canals of the Nile were dredged, and irrigation systems were improved, turning the region into a breadbasket that could support a burgeoning population. It was a savvy move, ensuring that his empire could feed itself and reducing the likelihood of food shortages, a common trigger for unrest. In the realm of religion, Saladin's legacy was equally profound. He was a staunch Sunni, and his efforts to promote Sunni Islam while respecting the diverse religious landscape of his empire set a precedent for tolerance that was rare for the time. His patronage of religious scholars and the establishment of madrasas helped cement the intellectual and theological foundations of Sunni Islam, influencing generations to come. This, in turn, reinforced his image as a pious leader, a critical component of his enduring appeal. But let's not put Saladin on too high a pedestal. He was, after all, a product of his time, and his actions were guided as much by political expediency as they were by moral conviction. His campaigns, while strategic and often humane, were also brutal when necessary. The realities of medieval warfare dictated a certain ruthlessness, and Saladin wasn't above using force to achieve his aims. His siege of Acre in 1189, for example, was a drawn-out and bloody affair, demonstrating that even the most chivalrous of leaders had their limits. As we sift through the sands of time, it's clear that Saladin's legacy is a multifaceted one. He was a complex figure who deftly navigated the turbulent waters of 12th century politics, leaving behind a legacy that was as much about perception as it was about reality. His mythos, carefully constructed and nurtured, allowed him to transcend the confines of his era, becoming a symbol of unity and strength in a region that was anything but unified. In the end, Saladin's story is a testament to the power of narrative. His life was a blend of calculated strategy and genuine charisma, a combination that allowed him to leave an indelible mark on history. While the romanticized tales may gloss over the harsher realities of his reign, they also serve as a reminder of the enduring appeal of a leader who could unite, conquer, and inspire in equal measure. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Saladin's life and legacy, remember that history is never quite as simple as it appears. The stories we tell are shaped by the myths we craft, the realities we confront, and the complexities that lie in between. Saladin's legacy is a mosaic of these elements, a rich tapestry woven from the threads of truth and legend. And in that tapestry, we find not just the story of a sultan, but a reflection of the timeless dance of power, politics, and human ambition. In the bustling, sun-drenched streets of Alexandria, you'd find more scrolls than Starbucks, and somewhere among the labyrinth of papyrus and ink was Hypatia, a young girl with her nose perpetually buried in ancient texts. Now, before anyone gets carried away with the notion that Hypatia was some sort of solitary genius, let's hit pause on that romanticized image. Sure, she was brilliant, but she wasn't exactly alone in her pursuits. Alexandria, during the late 4th century CE, was a melting pot of ideas, cultures, and enough intellectual ferment to make any modern think tank look like a kindergarten show and tell. Hypatia was born around 360 CE, give or take a few years because, hey, ancient record-keeping wasn't exactly known for its precision. Her father, Theon, was a mathematician and philosopher who probably had more Pythagorean theorems under his belt than most of us have unread emails. Theon was the director of the Museum of Alexandria, a position akin to running the Library of Congress today, but with more toga and less bureaucracy. He was determined to raise Hypatia as a perfect human, which in those days meant a well-rounded education rather than a perfect Instagram feed. Now, Alexandria wasn't just any city. Picture a place where the Nile kissed the Mediterranean, and you had a repository of knowledge literally at the crossroads of the ancient world. It was like the Silicon Valley of antiquity, but instead of coding and startups, you had philosophy and star charts. The city was founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, and by the time Hypatia was around, it had already been a bustling intellectual hub for over 600 years. Its library, supposedly home to hundreds of thousands of scrolls, was the stuff of legend, though its actual size and contents are as elusive as Bigfoot. Regardless, it was the closest thing to a universal library the ancient world had ever seen. Hypatia grew up in this vibrant academic environment, where the air was thick with the sound of scholars debating everything from mathematics to metaphysics. Her education was not an anomaly. Women in Alexandria had more access to learning than in many other places at the time, and Hypatia was among a community of learned women, though few reached her level of fame. Her early education likely included arithmetic, astronomy, philosophy, and the odd bit of rhetoric, which, let's face it, is just a fancy way of saying she was training to argue like a pro. But let's squash the myth that Hypatia was just a lone, enigmatic genius toiling away in obscurity. Her upbringing was steeped in the intellectual traditions of the city, surrounded by scholars who were probably as opinionated as they were bearded. Moreover, the idea that she was the only woman in her field is a bit of historical exaggeration. While it's true that the academic world was largely male-dominated, women were not invisible in the intellectual landscape of Alexandria. Hypatia, however, stood out not only because of her brilliance, but because she was teaching in a public role, which was unusual for women at the time. The political climate of Alexandria was as colorful as its academic one. The city was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, a hotbed of religious and cultural tensions. Christianity was on the rise, setting up a future collision course with the pagan philosophies that had long been the toast of the town. Hypatia's father was a pagan, and this context is crucial because Alexandria was like a powder keg of theological debate. In such an environment, Hypatia's education wasn't just about personal enrichment, it was a political statement. In a city where Greek, Egyptian, Roman, and Jewish influences collided, Hypatia was something of a Renaissance woman before the Renaissance was even a twinkle in Leonardo da Vinci's eye. She was known for her work in mathematics and astronomy, but she also delved into philosophy, which back then was the ultimate intellectual badge of honor. Being a philosopher meant you were in the business of asking questions that made everyone else uncomfortable, much like a teenager questioning the relevance of geometry homework. Hypatia was not content to simply absorb knowledge. She was an active participant in the intellectual life of the city. She would eventually become the head of the Neoplatonic school of philosophy in Alexandria, which was a pretty big deal. Neoplatonism was the philosophical equivalent of the hit Netflix series everyone was binging at the time. It combined the teachings of Plato with more mystical elements, like the idea that everything emanates from a single source of goodness. The fact that Hypatia was teaching these ideas in a predominantly male environment was a testament to her intellectual prowess and the respect she commanded. Yet, let's remember that Hypatia's story is not just about her own achievements, but about the world she inhabited. Alexandria was a place where knowledge was power, and Hypatia was at the heart of it all, not a lone lighthouse, but one of many beacons illuminating the murky waters of ignorance. So, while it's tempting to elevate her as a solitary figure battling against the tides of history, it's far more accurate to see her as a product of a vibrant, tumultuous environment. She wasn't just surviving in a man's world, she was thriving in a scholar's paradise. In this bustling mosaic of ideas and debates, Hypatia wasn't just content to be another scholar in the crowd. She was the intellectual equivalent of a rock star. Picture her strolling through the streets of Alexandria, perhaps with a scroll in one hand and a half-eaten olive in the other, her mind a whirlwind of geometric theorems and celestial charts. Her contributions to mathematics and astronomy weren't just about numbers and star maps. They were about understanding the very fabric of the universe. And let's be honest, in a world where most people thought the Earth sat on the back of a giant turtle or some equally imaginative beast, this was groundbreaking stuff. One of Hypatia's most famous pursuits was her work with the astrolabe. Now, the astrolabe was the ancient equivalent of Google Maps, but instead of directing you to the nearest tavern, it helped you navigate the stars. This nifty gadget, a sort of flat, brass pizza with engraved lines and movable parts, allowed scholars to measure the altitude of stars above the horizon, which was crucial for everything from navigation to astrology. Imagine sailors setting off on epic Mediterranean voyages with nothing but this celestial compass and a good dose of optimism. Hypatia's refinements to the astrolabe didn't invent the thing outright. She was more like the Steve Jobs of the astrolabe world, taking existing concepts and making them far more user-friendly and accurate. Then there were her deep dives into the world of conic sections. And before you roll your eyes and start having nightmares about high school geometry, let me assure you, this was way cooler than it sounds. Conic sections are the curves you get when you slice through a cone at different angles. Think circles, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas. In the hands of mathematicians like Hypatia, these weren't just abstract concepts, but the key to unlocking the mysteries of motion and optics. If she'd been given a few more centuries, she might have beaten Newton to the punch on gravity. Conic sections were to the ancients what quantum physics is to us today, a mind-bending glimpse into the underlying principles of reality. But let's address a common misconception. Hypatia didn't invent these ideas from scratch. She stood on the shoulders of giants like Apollonius of Perga, who laid much of the groundwork centuries earlier. What she did was synthesize, clarify, and teach these concepts with a brilliance that made them accessible to a wider audience. Think of her as the TED speaker of her time, making complex theories sound not only comprehensible, but downright entertaining. In her public lectures, Hypatia was known for her charisma and wit. Imagine a classroom where learning about ellipses was as engaging as a Netflix comedy special. She had the rare gift of making people forget they were learning mathematics, which is no small feat considering how many adults need therapy just to look at a quadratic equation. Her students, both men and women, were drawn not only by the allure of knowledge, but by the magnetic force of her personality. In a city teeming with intellectual heavyweights, Hypatia's classroom was the place to be, where the sharpness of her intellect was matched only by the sharpness of her humor. Now, Alexandria wasn't just an ivory tower of academia. It was a city where politics, religion, and philosophy were in constant, often volatile, conversation. Hypatia's role as a teacher was as much about navigating these choppy waters as it was about pure scholarship. In an era when religious and philosophical identities were not only personal beliefs, but political statements, her classroom was a sanctuary of free thought. She taught the likes of Synesius of Cyrene, who would later become a bishop, illustrating how her influence crossed sectarian lines. Despite the romanticized notion of Hypatia as a solitary genius, her achievements were deeply embedded in the vibrant intellectual culture of Alexandria. It's tempting to see her as a lone beacon of knowledge in a dark age, but that's a Hollywood script, not reality. Her story is one of collaboration, conversation, and competition, with a dash of ancient drama thrown in. Sure, she was exceptional, but she was part of a bustling ecosystem of thinkers, each contributing to the collective pool of human understanding. As we explore Hypatia's life, it's vital to remember the context of her world, a world that was at once familiar and alien. While her contributions to mathematics and astronomy were groundbreaking, they were also part of a broader tapestry of human endeavor that spanned centuries and civilizations. Her legacy is not just one of individual brilliance, but of a community that valued knowledge, debate, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Hypatia's story reminds us that while the past may be a foreign country, some things are timeless. The thrill of discovery, the joy of intellectual exploration, and the power of a well-timed joke to make even the most complex theories a little less daunting. Her life and work continue to inspire, not because she was a flawless icon, but because she was a brilliantly flawed human navigating a brilliantly flawed world. And isn't that the most relatable myth of all? Hypatia's life wasn't just a study in intellectual brilliance. It was a masterclass in navigating the political maze of Alexandria, a city where alliances shifted faster than a soap opera plot twist. Her public life was as much about the art of diplomacy as it was about philosophy. And by the gods, did she know how to play the game? Imagine a world where being a philosopher meant you were also a de facto political consultant. It's a bit like being a modern-day academic with a side hustle as a political strategist, except with more scrolls and less social media. In the late 4th and early 5th centuries, Alexandria was a city teetering on the edge of chaos, with religious factions squabbling like rival fan clubs at a concert. Christianity was on the rise, and paganism was fast becoming yesterday's news. Enter Hypatia, a Neoplatonist philosopher who managed to keep her head above the fray, quite literally, until she didn't, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Her reputation as a respected advisor didn't come from idle chatter in the agora. Hypatia was deeply involved in the city's political scene, rubbing elbows with the movers and shakers of her time. One of her most notable connections was Orsts, the Roman prefect of Alexandria. Think of him as the city's mayor, but with a toga and a lot more trouble on his plate. Orsts valued Hypatia's counsel, not just because she could solve quadratic equations in her sleep, but because she had the rare ability to see both the forest and the trees in the political landscape. Their relationship was a classic case of brains meets brawn, with Orsts relying on Hypatia's wisdom to navigate the city's turbulent waters. Hypatia was something of a political unicorn, an intellectual who could cut through the noise and offer clear, rational advice. She was like the human version of a Swiss Army knife, equipped with tools for every occasion. Orsts knew that in a city where a philosophical debate could quickly escalate into a full-blown riot, having Hypatia on speed dial, or its 5th century equivalent, was invaluable. But it wasn't all late-night strategy sessions and philosophical musings. Hypatia's influence extended beyond backroom dealings and into the public sphere. Her lectures were legendary, drawing crowds of students and dignitaries alike. These weren't your run-of-the-mill university seminars. They were intellectual events, the TED talks of their day, where Hypatia would dissect topics ranging from mathematics to metaphysics with a wit as sharp as a Spartan sword. Her ability to mix humor with highbrow concepts was part of her charm. Imagine the audience hanging on her every word, as if she were the Beyoncé of the academic world. Yet, as much as she was adored by many, Hypatia's public life was not without its detractors. The political climate in Alexandria was a powder keg of tensions, with religious leaders like Cyril, the Bishop of Alexandria, wielding influence that rivaled even the Roman authorities. Cyril was the kind of guy who didn't just want to win, he wanted to dominate the narrative. Hypatia's close ties with Orsts and her staunch pagan beliefs made her a thorn in Cyril's side. It was a classic case of brain versus brawn, only this time the stakes were anything but academic. Cyril saw Hypatia as a symbol of the old pagan order and a barrier to the church's dominance. In a city where the line between religious conviction and political power was blurrier than a Monet painting, Hypatia's presence was a direct challenge to the rising tide of Christian orthodoxy. Cyril wasn't just playing a game of chess, he was flipping the board and making up the rules as he went along. For him, Hypatia wasn't just a scholar, she was a symbol of resistance against the church's authority. But let's not paint Hypatia as some naive philosopher caught in the crossfire. She was acutely aware of the political currents swirling around her. Her public persona was a carefully crafted blend of intellect and charisma, making her a formidable figure in Alexandria's political landscape. She knew that in a world where allegiances were as fickle as the Mediterranean weather, staying relevant meant staying ahead of the game. Her ability to maintain her influence in such a volatile environment speaks volumes about her strategic acumen. Hypatia wasn't just playing the game. She was rewriting the rules. While others were busy drawing lines in the sand, she was building bridges, forging alliances that transcended religious and philosophical divides. Her friendships with Christian scholars and politicians were not mere accidents of history. They were deliberate moves on a chessboard where every piece was in constant flux. Yet, despite her efforts to remain above the fray, Hypatia's life was inexorably intertwined with the political drama of Alexandria. Her relationships with figures like Orsts and her position as an advisor placed her squarely in the crosshairs of those who saw her as a threat to the new religious order. Hypatia, with her unyielding commitment to philosophy and reason, was a beacon of the old ways, a lighthouse in a stormy sea of change. But in a city where the sands of time were shifting beneath her feet, Hypatia's story was far from over. The stage was set for a clash of titans, and in the brutal world of politics, not even the brightest stars are immune to the darkness. The stage was indeed set for a clash of titans, and Alexandria was the perfect arena. This was a city teetering on the edge of chaos, where the interplay of religion and politics was as volatile as a Roman candle at a Greek festival. Hypatia found herself in the eye of this storm, not just because of her brilliance, but because she symbolized an era that was slipping away faster than a greased pig at a country fair. Let's talk about the social and religious tensions that were about to turn the city into a real-life Game of Thrones episode. By the early 5th century, Alexandria was a melting pot with the ingredients for disaster. A burgeoning Christian community, a tradition of Greco-Roman paganism, and a Jewish population that had been an integral part of the city since its founding. These groups interacted with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, and Hypatia was caught in the middle, a symbol of the old world in a city that was rapidly changing its tune. Christianity wasn't just on the rise. It was doing the ancient equivalent of a hostile corporate takeover. Bishops like Cyril weren't just spiritual leaders, they were power brokers. Cyril had the charisma of a rock star and the ambition to match. He wasn't content with just religious influence. He wanted the whole shebang, political power, social control, the works, and he had the muscle to back it up. Enter the Parabolani, a group of Christian enforcers who were as subtle as a sledgehammer. Officially, they were supposed to help the sick and bury the dead, but their extracurricular activities involved more than a little bit of strong-arming. Now, Cyril and his crew saw Hypatia as the embodiment of pagan resistance. She was a respected advisor to Orsts, who was not exactly on Cyril's Christmas card list, and her public lectures were intellectual gatherings that didn't toe the line of Christian orthodoxy. In a city where religious fervor was at an all-time high, Hypatia's commitment to Neoplatonism was seen as a relic of a bygone era, much like phone booths or blockbuster video. And for Cyril, that era needed to be buried once and for all. Here's the kicker, though. Hypatia wasn't just a pagan philosopher. She was a public intellectual who had friends across the religious spectrum. She wasn't organizing secret pagan rituals or plotting against the church. She was teaching mathematics and philosophy to anyone who cared to listen. But in the charged atmosphere of Alexandria, facts were as malleable as clay in a potter's hands. It didn't matter that she wasn't a political dissident. The perception was enough to put her in danger. And here's where we start to separate the myth from the messy reality. The legend goes that Hypatia was brutally murdered by a Christian mob, flayed alive with oyster shells, a gruesome detail that adds a splash of horror to her story. However, historical sources like the contemporary account by Socrates Scholasticus suggest a slightly less cinematic, though no less tragic, version. She was indeed killed by a mob, but the tools and methods are somewhat obscured by time and the biases of chroniclers. What's clear is that her death was a political assassination, fueled by religious fanaticism and the power struggles of the day. Hypatia's murder was not just a crime against a single individual. It was a symbolic act, a warning shot fired across the bow of an intellectual tradition that was increasingly at odds with the rising tide of Christian orthodoxy. It was the ultimate irony. A woman who had devoted her life to the pursuit of knowledge, and the art of teaching was silenced by the very forces that feared her influence. It's a grim reminder that in the theater of human history, the brightest minds can sometimes be extinguished by the darkest acts of ignorance. But let's pause for a moment to consider the absurdity of it all. Hypatia's life was a testament to the power of inquiry, to the idea that questions were more valuable than answers. And yet, her death was a stark reminder of the perils of dogma, the dangers of a world where questions are met not with dialogue, but with violence. It's a darkly comedic twist, a historical punchline that underscores the sheer absurdity of fanaticism in any form. So, what does this tell us about human nature? That we're capable of both breathtaking brilliance and baffling brutality, often in the same breath. Hypatia's story reminds us that while we may strive for enlightenment, we're never too far from the shadows. It's a tale as old as time, a narrative that plays out in countless variations across the ages. And Alexandria, with its heady mix of cultures and conflicts, was the perfect stage for this tragic drama to unfold. As we draw this part of Hypatia's story to a close, we must resist the temptation to see her solely as a victim. She was a pioneer, a trailblazer who left an indelible mark on the intellectual landscape of her time. Her legacy is one of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of ideas, even when the world seems hell-bent on extinguishing them. In the end, Hypatia's life and death serve as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, a reminder that while the arc of history may be long, it bends toward enlightenment only through the efforts of those brave enough to challenge the status quo. And that, dear friends, is where we leave Hypatia for now, poised on the precipice of a story that is far from finished. So, what happens when a brilliant mind like Hypatia's is snuffed out by the chaos of fanaticism? Does her legacy fade into the papyrus scrolls of history, or does it ignite a spark that outlives the flames? Spoiler alert, it's the latter. Hypatia's legacy is like a particularly stubborn candle. No matter how many times you try to blow it out, it keeps on burning. You see, the fascinating thing about ideas is that they have a way of sticking around, even when the people who birth them do not. Hypatia's work, particularly in mathematics and philosophy, laid the groundwork for generations of scholars. Her contributions to algebra and her work on the astrolabe continue to echo through the halls of academia long after her untimely exit from the stage. Her teachings were like the ancient world's version of a viral TED talk, a catalyst for intellectual curiosity that couldn't be easily dismissed. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find Hypatia popping up in the most unexpected places. Her influence reached the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars like Al-Khwarizmi were laying the foundations for modern algebra and algorithms. Yes, folks, the very algorithms that now decide what cat videos to show you on YouTube may owe a tiny debt to Hypatia. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a sort of intellectual HQ that would make even the library of Alexandria jealous, was bustling with scholars who were well-versed in the mathematical principles that Hypatia had championed. But Hypatia's story isn't just about numbers and theories. It's about intellectual courage, the kind that challenges the status quo and dares to ask uncomfortable questions. Her life was a masterclass in navigating a world that often felt like an extended episode of Survivor. Alexandria, where alliances were fragile and the stakes were life and death. Her intellectual bravery inspired a lineage of thinkers who refused to let the flickering flame of knowledge be extinguished by the winds of ignorance. Now, let's talk about the myth-making. Over the centuries, Hypatia has been enveloped in a romantic haze, often depicted as a lone beacon of enlightenment in a world teetering on the brink of darkness. But while the myth is compelling, it's also a bit of a historical fudge. Hypatia was not the solitary sage Hollywood might have you believe. She was part of a vibrant academic community, a chorus of voices that collectively pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Yet, the appeal of the lone genius trope is undeniable. It's a narrative that speaks to our love for the underdog, the solitary hero battling against the odds. It's the same reason we cheer for the nerdy kid in a coming-of-age film who outsmarts the jocks. But in reality, Hypatia's brilliance was amplified by the intellectual ecosystem of Alexandria. a city that was, for a time, the intellectual capital of the world. As the centuries rolled on, Hypatia became a symbol, a martyr for the cause of reason, and a rallying point for those who championed the pursuit of knowledge. Her story was resurrected during the Renaissance, when scholars like Galileo and Copernicus were challenging the orthodoxy of their own time. Hypatia became a beacon of inspiration for those who dared to stand at the intersection of science and faith, often at great personal risk. In modern times, Hypatia's legacy continues to resonate, particularly in the realms of education and women's rights. She's become an icon for educators and feminists alike, a reminder that intellectual courage knows no gender. Her life serves as a stark reminder that the quest for knowledge is not just an academic exercise, but a deeply human endeavor fraught with challenges and triumphs. So, what can modern society learn from Hypatia and the myths that surround her? For starters, her story reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a noble, albeit perilous, path. It's a journey that requires courage, resilience, and an unyielding belief in the power of inquiry. In a world where misinformation can spread as fast as a meme, Hypatia's commitment to intellectual rigor and critical thinking feels more relevant than ever. Moreover, her life and the myths that have grown around it offer a cautionary tale about the dangers of dogma and the perils of a society that values conformity over curiosity. In a world that's often divided along ideological lines, Hypatia's story challenges us to embrace nuance and complexity, to seek understanding rather than absolutes. Finally, Hypatia's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas. Long after the dust of Alexandria settled, her contributions continue to inspire, challenge, and educate. Her life is a powerful reminder that while we may be fragile, our ideas can be remarkably resilient. They have the power to transcend time, to inspire generations, and to light the way forward in our endless quest for knowledge. As we wrap up our journey through the life and legacy of Hypatia, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons she offers. In a world that's constantly changing, where technology and information move at warp speed, Hypatia's story is a call to slow down and engage in thoughtful inquiry. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is not just about accumulating facts, but about fostering a deeper understanding of the world around us. So here's to Hypatia, a woman who dared to think differently, who challenged the norms of her time, and who reminds us that while history may be written in stone, the future is ours to shape. Her story is far from finished, and as we continue to explore the mysteries of the universe, her legacy will undoubtedly continue to inspire those who seek to illuminate the shadows with the light of knowledge. In the grand tapestry of European history, Catherine de' Medici's story starts not with a golden cradle, but with a scandalous bank account. Born in Florence in 1519, Catherine was a Medici, a family whose clout was as big as their bank vaults. And let me tell you, those vaults were basically the Fort Knox of the Renaissance. The Medici family wasn't just any collection of rich folks. They were the original godfathers of the banking world, with a side hustle in popes and palaces. At its peak, the Medici Bank was the largest in Europe, making them the Jeff Bezos of the 16th century, minus the space rockets. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Little Catherine was orphaned by age 7. Both her parents swept away by illness, leaving her a political pawn in a game more cutthroat than an episode of Survivor. Shipped off to a convent like a problematic package, she was shuffled around as the political winds changed. You see, the Medici weren't just bankers. They were masterful puppeteers of European politics. And Catherine, she was their marionette, her strings pulled by uncles and cardinals who saw her not as a child, but as a key to power. Now, if you think Catherine's early life was straight out of a fairy tale, think again. This wasn't a Cinderella story. It was more like Game of Thrones, with better clothes and less gratuitous violence. Well, slightly less. At the tender age of 14, Catherine was shipped off to France to marry Henry of Orleans, the future Henry Roman II. It was a strategic alliance that would make Machiavelli proud, and incidentally, he was a family friend. Henry was the second son of King Francis I, which in royal terms made him the backup quarterback of the French monarchy. But Catherine wasn't fazed. She was about to play the long game, and spoiler alert, she'd win. The marriage was a real page-turner for the tabloids of the day. Picture a young Italian noblewoman walking into the glittering court of France, where everyone was just a bit too obsessed with jousting and puffy sleeves. Catherine's dowry was a whopping 100,000 gold crowns, an astronomical sum that could buy, oh, just about everything. But while her pockets were full, her heart was decidedly not. Henry was more interested in his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, a woman 20 years his senior, than in his teenage bride. Talk about awkward third wheels at the royal dinner table. Life at court wasn't exactly easy street for Catherine. She was short, not particularly pretty, and spoke French with an accent thicker than a Florentine steak. The French nobles looked at her like she was a foreign exchange student who just didn't get the memo about not wearing socks with sandals. But Catherine had one thing going for her. She was smart, wicked smart. She knew that patience was her best weapon, and she wielded it like a pro. Now, let's talk about the political chessboard of 16th century Europe. France was sandwiched between the colossal Habsburg Empire and a gaggle of independent Italian states that were like a Renaissance version of the Real Housewives. Everyone was either trying to marry into power or stab someone in the back, metaphorically speaking, and sometimes literally, because history was hardcore like that. Catherine's marriage to Henry thrust her right into this mess, a world where alliances shifted faster than you could say diplomatic immunity. Catherine had to navigate this shark tank while keeping her own head above water, a feat that required the diplomatic skills of a seasoned ambassador and the patience of a saint. Her Italian heritage didn't exactly help her case in a France still smarting from Italian invasions and political betrayals. But Catherine had something else up her sleeve, the art of subtle influence. While Henry jousted and dallied, Catherine observed and learned, biding her time like a master strategist. In 1536, the unexpected happened. Henry's older brother, Francis, died suddenly. Conspiracy theories abounded, as they do when a royal drops dead, but the result was clear. Henry was now the heir apparent, and Catherine was suddenly in line to be the next queen consort. Talk about a plot twist. It was like she'd drawn the wild card in a high-stakes poker game. With this turn of events, Catherine's role took on new significance. She wasn't just a decorative bride anymore. She was the future Queen of France, poised to wield influence in one of the most powerful courts in Europe. And let's not forget the Medici family's knack for survival. They'd been bankers, rulers, and even popes. Catherine's great-grandfather, Lorenzo de Medici, had been dubbed Il Magnifico for his ability to mix politics and art like a Renaissance cocktail. Catherine carried that legacy with her, her mind as sharp as the jewels she wore. She was a Medici through and through, ready to play the long game in a court that was more dangerous than any battlefield. So here she was, a young Italian woman in a foreign land, with more political rivals than she could count, and a husband whose heart belonged to someone else. But Catherine wasn't just any woman. She had the pedigree of a banking dynasty and the cunning of a seasoned diplomat. Her rise to power would be anything but conventional, and the history books would soon be filled with tales of her influence. Call it destiny, call it strategy, but one thing was certain. Catherine de Medici was a force to be reckoned with, and France was just about to find out why. Catherine de Medici was now positioned like a pawn-turned-queen on a chessboard where the stakes were as high as her hairdo. But let's not kid ourselves. Her ascent wasn't exactly accompanied by a choir of angels. For starters, she had to deal with Diane de Poitiers, the woman who was to Henry what Instagram is to influencers. Indispensable. Diane was 20 years Catherine's senior, and let me tell you, she wielded her influence like a seasoned pro. If there was a manual on maintaining power as a royal mistress, Diane might as well have written it. With Diane around, Catherine had to play her cards right. Imagine being married to someone whose affections are locked away like a Netflix password, while the keyholder has the audacity to be both beautiful and fiercely intelligent. Diane wasn't just eye candy. She was a political force. She even had her own apartments in the Louvre. And yes, that's the same Louvre where tourists now snap selfies with the Mona Lisa. Diane's influence on Henry was as potent as Catherine's Medici bloodline, and navigating this personal and political minefield was akin to walking a tightrope in a gale-force wind. Catherine's strategy, patience, and pragmatism. She bided her time and focused on her duties, which included producing heirs, always a top item on the royal job description. The couple had 10 children, and if you're counting, That's more than enough to start a basketball team with a few spares. This prolific output made Catherine indispensable in her own right, as her offspring could secure the future of the Valois dynasty. But let's not sugarcoat it. The marriage bed was as cold as the marble floors of the Chateau de Fontainebleau. Now, onto the juicy bits about Catherine's alleged penchant for poison. The 16th century was basically the Wild West of toxic substances, and poison was the preferred tool for those who had a grudge and a lack of patience. Rumours flew faster than a falcon at a royal hunt, painting Catherine as a poison aficionado, a black widow who could whip up a deadly concoction faster than you could say arsenic. But hold your horses. Let's sift through the slander. While it's true that the Medici were suspected of having a few poisoners in their employ, and Catherine was known to dabble in chemistry, much of this was good old-fashioned court gossip. In reality, she was more interested in perfumes and cosmetics than in dispatching foes with a drop of something sinister. This doesn't mean Catherine was a shrinking violet. Far from it. She understood the importance of image and symbolism, using them like a maestro conducting a symphony of influence. When Henry ascended to the throne in 1547, making Catherine the queen consort, her role became even more complex. She was expected to be a figurehead of piety and grace, while maneuvering through a court that was as treacherous as a snake pit. And let's just say, she was no stranger to the art of subtle manipulation. Her relationship with Diane remained a thorny issue. While Diane managed the king's heart, Catherine managed the royal household, including financial matters, a domain she was more than comfortable in, thanks to her Medici upbringing. You could say Diane was the Queen of Hearts, while Catherine was the Queen of Spades, digging her way through the political soil to plant seeds of future power. It was a complex dance of influence, Diane holding the king's ear and Catherine holding the kingdom's purse strings. Speaking of finances, Catherine knew how to stretch a liver. The French economy during her reign was a roller coaster, influenced by wars and the whims of monarchs. Catherine's Medici sensibilities came in handy as she navigated the financial quagmires of the era. She understood that an empty treasury was a kingdom's Achilles heel, and worked to keep the state coffers as full as her court attire was extravagant, as if balancing a chilly marriage, a meddling mistress, and national finances weren't enough. Catherine also had to contend with the religious tensions that were sizzling across Europe like a hot griddle. The Protestant Reformation was in full swing, and France was caught in the crossfire between Catholics and the burgeoning Huguenot movement. Catherine, a Catholic in a country riddled with religious strife, had her work cut out for her. Her approach was one of cautious pragmatism. She advocated for a level of tolerance, seeking to maintain peace in a nation where religious wars were as common as fashion faux pas at court. Yet, it's important to note that Catherine's legacy is often overshadowed by the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, a tragic event that occurred after Henry Roman II's death. While her involvement remains a subject of historical debate, the massacre cemented her infamous reputation. Was she a Machiavellian mastermind, or simply a woman trying to stabilize her realm in a time of chaos? The jury's still out, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's more to unfold in this saga. In the grand theatre of the French court, Catherine's reign as queen consort wasn't marked by love or scandalous affairs of her own, but by her sheer resilience and political acumen. Her life was a masterclass in survival, a lesson in navigating the perilous waters of 16th century European politics. She may not have had the public's adoration like Diane, but she had something perhaps more enduring, influence. And in the world of power, influence is the currency that never loses its value. As we delve further into her story, we'll see how Catherine's strategies and decisions continue to shape not just her family's destiny, but the future of France itself. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. And speaking of Catherine's influence, it was about to face its toughest test yet. Henry Roman II's death in 1559 spun the wheel of fortune in her favor, albeit wrapped in a cloak of mourning. The jousting accident that ended his life was as tragic as it was ironic. A king felled not by war, but by a splintered lance, courtesy of Gabriel de Montgomery, a Scottish nobleman who probably wished he'd called in sick that day. With Henry gone, Catherine transformed from queen consort to queen regent, wielding power with a grace that belied the chaos threatening to engulf France. Now, Catherine had 3 sons who would wear the French crown like a hand-me-down sweater: Francis Roman II, Charles Roman IX, and Henry Roman III. Each came with their own set of challenges and quirks, which, let's just say, made the Brady Bunch look like a well-oiled machine. First up was Francis Roman II, who ascended at the tender age of 15. His reign was short-lived, just 17 months, like a summer romance that fizzles out before the first snow. He was sickly and heavily influenced by his wife, Mary, Queen of Scots, and her guys' uncles, who were to religious zealotry what the Kardashians are to reality TV, omnipresent and controversial. Catherine, however, wasn't about to let her influence wane just because her son had a crown on his head. She navigated the political labyrinth with the dexterity of someone who's memorized the maze. Her regency was characterized by a series of balancing acts, juggling the Catholic hardliners and the Protestant Huguenots who were increasingly at each other's throats like a couple of feral cats in a burlap sack. The stakes were high, and the cost of failure: civil war. Charles Roman IX followed his brother to the throne in 1560, and Catherine's role as regent continued. Charles was a young king with more enthusiasm than political acumen, and that's putting it mildly. It was under his reign that the powder keg finally ignited. France was a religious tinderbox, and Catherine's efforts to maintain peace were akin to patching a leaky boat while navigating a hurricane. Her attempts at reconciliation, like the Edict of Saint-Germain in 1562, which granted Huguenots some freedoms, were as popular as a soggy baguette at a Parisian picnic. The edict was followed by the massacre of Vassy, where Catholic forces attacked a Protestant congregation, leaving scores dead and unleashing the first of the French wars of religion. Catherine's strategy was one of pragmatic diplomacy, with a side of Machiavellian flair. Hosted the Colloquy of Poissy in 1561, a religious summit that was supposed to be a conveyor moment between Catholics and Protestants. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. The two sides were as likely to agree as cats and dogs on a rainy day. Still, Catherine tried to keep the peace, knowing that a fractured France was a weakened France, ripe for external exploitation. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's reputation took a nosedive with the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, a dark chapter that still stirs debate among historians like a particularly contentious episode of Game of Thrones. The massacre occurred in the aftermath of the marriage between Catherine's daughter, Marguerite de Valois, and Henry of Navarre, a Protestant. The union was supposed to be a bridge over troubled waters, but it turned into a bridge to nowhere. Protestant leaders had gathered in Paris for the wedding, and tensions were already higher than a kite in a windstorm. The massacre began on August 24, 1572, when Catholic mobs, possibly incited by the royal court, launched a violent purge against the Huguenots, resulting in thousands of deaths. Picture a city in chaos, streets awash with violence that spread across France like wildfire. Catherine's role in the massacre has been the subject of speculation and sensationalism ever since. Was she the puppet master pulling the strings, or a mother trying to protect her children from the political fallout of a divided kingdom? Some argue Catherine was a Machiavellian mastermind, a Lady Macbeth draped in Italian silk. Others suggest she was merely reacting to an uncontrollable situation, spiraling faster than a Parisian carousel. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a murky blend of political necessity and desperation. The massacre cemented her infamy, a legacy that would haunt her like a ghost in the palace halls. Economically, this period was a quagmire. The wars drained the royal coffers faster than you could say déjà vu, leaving the treasury emptier than a theatre showing a Shakespearean tragedy. Catherine's Medici roots came to the fore as she tried to stabilize the economy with limited success. The French economy during her regency was a rickety cart, liable to tip over with the slightest nudge, and Catherine had to use all her financial acumen to keep it upright. Her regency faced not just religious turmoil, but also external threats. Spain loomed large on the horizon, with King Philip Roman II eyeing France like a cat watches a canary. Catherine knew that a unified France was essential to fend off any Habsburg ambitions. Her diplomatic dance with Spain was as intricate as a minuet, requiring the finesse of a ballerina and the cunning of a fox. As for Catherine's legacy, it remains as complex as the woman herself. Was she a ruthless power broker, a mother protecting her brood, or a pragmatic ruler caught in a maelstrom of religious and political turmoil. The evidence is as mixed as a Renaissance cocktail, with equal parts cunning, desperation, and survival. Catherine's regency was a masterclass in crisis management, with every decision scrutinized through the lens of history. Her life was a testament to the power dynamics of 16th century Europe, where influence was as fleeting as a summer breeze. Yet, despite the chaos and bloodshed, Catherine managed to keep the monarchy afloat, a feat as impressive as it was fraught with peril. In the end, Catherine de' Medici was a product of her time, a period where survival was an art form and power was a game played with high stakes. Her story is far from over, as we'll see in the next chapter of this historical saga. So buckle up, history buffs. Catherine's tale has more twists than a French vineyard, and the drama is just getting started. And so, as Catherine de' Medici continued to navigate the labyrinth of French politics, she did so not as an all-powerful monarch, but as a mother with 3 sons who were each as different as a trio of mismatched sarks. If you thought parenting was hard, try doing it while balancing the fate of a nation on your shoulders. Catherine's later years were a veritable roller coaster of diplomacy, intrigue, and a healthy dose of artful manipulation. Let's dive into the soap opera that was her life with her sons. First, there's Charles Roman IX, a king who, despite his royal title, was about as prepared to rule as a cat is to drive a car. He was emotional, prone to fits of rage, and had the decision-making skills of a magic 8-ball. Catherine, ever the pragmatic matriarch, took the reins, guiding him through the political minefield of France like a seasoned chess player directing a novice through a particularly tricky endgame. It was Catherine who effectively ran the show, wielding power behind the scenes like a master puppeteer. But even a puppet master has her limits. The infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre loomed large over Charles' reign, a dark cloud casting a shadow over the court. The massacre, which left thousands dead, was a stain on Catherine's legacy, and the young king was haunted by the bloodshed. Some historians suggest that the guilt contributed to his early death at the age of 23 in 1574. Catherine, now having outlived another son, found herself once again pulling the strings for her next son, Henry Roman III. Henry Roman III, a king who was as flamboyant as he was pious, with a penchant for pearls and parties. His reign was marked by excess and intrigue, a veritable carnival of courtly antics. Henry was a man of contrasts, devoutly Catholic yet rumored to indulge in all manner of decadence. While he was off hosting extravagant balls, Catherine was busy trying to keep the kingdom from unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. Catherine's guidance of Henry Roman III was akin to a game of risk, each move calculated, knowing that one wrong step could spell disaster. The French wars of religion were a continuous backdrop, a simmering pot of tension that threatened to boil over at any moment. Catherine's strategy was one of balance, akin to a tightrope walker tiptoeing across a chasm. She sought to maintain a precarious peace between the Catholic League and the Huguenots, each faction as volatile as a firecracker with a short fuse. Now, let's talk about Catherine's contribution to the arts and architecture, a cultural legacy that's as grand as the palaces she helped embellish. Catherine had an eye for beauty, and she wasn't shy about spending lavishly to ensure the French court was as dazzling as a Renaissance fair. Her patronage extended to the likes of the renowned architect Philibert de Relorme, who contributed to the construction of the Tuileries Palace, a symbol of royal grandeur that would stand the test of time. The palace, which began construction in 1564, was a testament to Renaissance architecture and Catherine's desire to leave a lasting mark on France. And let's not forget the arts. Catherine's court was a hub for artists, musicians, and thinkers, a vibrant tapestry of creativity that drew the best and brightest from across Europe. Her love for the arts wasn't just about prestige. It was about crafting a legacy, ensuring that the Valois dynasty was remembered not just for its political maneuvering, but for its contributions to culture. She was like a Renaissance opera, handing out patronage and support like they were prizes on a game show. You get a grant, and you get a grant. Everyone gets a grant. Yet, while Catherine was building cultural bridges, the political ones were crumbling faster than a cookie in hot tea. The tension between the Catholic League and the Huguenots was reaching a fever pitch, threatening to plunge France into chaos once more. Catherine's balancing act required the dexterity of a circus performer, her every move scrutinized by factions eager to topple the delicate equilibrium she'd worked so hard to maintain. In her later years, Catherine was like the eye of a storm, calm amidst the swirling chaos of a France on the brink. She was a Medici to her core, skilled in the art of survival and the subtle dance of diplomacy. Her influence over her sons, the kings of France, was a testament to her enduring legacy, a testament to a woman who navigated the perilous waters of power with a finesse that was as impressive as it was necessary. Yet, despite her efforts, the cracks in the kingdom were widening. The religious wars had drained the coffers, and the economy was teetering on the edge of collapse. Catherine's financial acumen, honed by her Medici upbringing, was put to the test as she attempted to patch the holes in the royal treasury. It was a Sisyphean task, akin to trying to fill a bucket with a sieve, but Catherine was nothing if not tenacious. Her later years were marked by a relentless drive to secure her family's legacy and the stability of France. She was a woman who understood the power of influence and wielded it with a deft hand, ensuring that her sons might stand a chance in the turbulent world they'd inherited. Catherine de' Medici was a force of nature, her life a masterclass in the art of survival and the pursuit of power. As we look at Catherine's legacy, it's clear that her influence was as complex and multifaceted as the woman herself. She was a patron of the arts, a political strategist, and a devoted mother, each role intertwining to create a legacy that would endure long after her death in 1589. Her story, like the best historical narratives, is filled with triumphs and tragedies, a reflection of the turbulent times in which she lived. So, as we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Catherine's life, remember that her tale is far from over. The stage is set for the final act, and the drama of her life continues to unfold with all the twists and turns of a historical thriller. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never truly past, and Catherine de' Medici's story is one that continues to captivate and intrigue. As Catherine de' Medici's story draws to a close, it's a bit like watching the final episode of a gripping series, full of anticipation and a hope for answers. Catherine spent her last years in a whirlwind of political maneuvering, trying to keep her kingdom intact, like a one-woman SWAT team of diplomacy. But let's not sugarcoat it. France at the time was about as stable as a game of Jenga played in an earthquake zone. With her son Henry Roman III on the throne, Catherine continued to be the power behind the curtain, a role she wore as comfortably as her Italian silk gowns. By the late 1500 AD, Catherine was juggling the religious wars, economic instability, and a court that was as treacherous as a nest of vipers, with a bad attitude. In January 1589, she faced her final curtain call at the age of 69, a ripe old age for the 16th century, when life expectancy was more like a coin toss. Her death marked the end of an era, and her passing was as much a political event as a personal tragedy. The kingdom she left behind was still embroiled in the French wars of religion, a conflict that had more plot twists than a soap opera. So, what about Catherine's legacy? Well, it's a mixed bag of myths, truths, and everything in between. Some see her as a Machiavellian mastermind, a lady who could have taught a masterclass in political maneuvering. Others paint her as a villainess, a woman with a penchant for poison and an appetite for power. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle, a swirl of political savvy and survival instinct, wrapped up in the complex tapestry of 16th century power dynamics. Despite the dark shadows cast by events like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, Catherine's influence extended beyond the political realm. She was a patron of the arts, a supporter of architectural splendor, and a promoter of Renaissance culture in France. Her court was a vibrant hub of creativity, a testament to her Medici roots and her desire to leave a cultural legacy that would outlast the political turmoil of her time. The Tuileries Palace, though long gone, and her support for the arts were like postcards from a bygone era, reminders of her impact on French culture. Economically, Catherine's reign was a roller coaster, with the treasury often emptier than a student's bank account after a weekend splurge. She did her best to stabilize the economy, but the religious wars were as costly as they were bloody. France's coffers were as drained as a 16th century wine cask at a royal banquet, and Catherine's financial acumen was put to the test as she tried to keep the kingdom from going bankrupt. But let's fast forward a few centuries and imagine Catherine as a modern-day political influencer. Picture her with a Twitter account, dropping truth bombs and wry observations with the finesse of a seasoned social media maven. She'd probably have a podcast, Medici maneuvers, breaking down the art of political strategy with a side of Italian charm. Her Instagram would be a blend of Renaissance art and sharp political commentary, a visual feast for history buffs and policy wonks alike. In today's world, Catherine might have thrived as a behind-the-scenes power broker, a political consultant with a knack for navigating treacherous waters. Her ability to balance competing factions and maintain influence in a male-dominated world would make her a force to be reckoned with in any era. She'd likely be ahead of the curve on issues like women's rights and political diplomacy, a testament to her enduring relevance. Catherine's legacy, both myth and reality, is a reflection of the time she lived in, a period where power was a game fraught with peril and opportunities were as fleeting as a French summer. Her story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, more often a shade of grey with a splash of colour. It's a tale of survival, influence, and the relentless pursuit of power in a world where the stakes were as high as the towers of Notre Dame. As we wrap up the saga of Catherine de Medici, remember that her story is just one thread in the rich tapestry of history. It's a narrative filled with triumphs and tragedies, a reflection of human nature in all its complexity. Her life is a testament to the power of influence, the art of diplomacy, and the enduring allure of political intrigue. So, as you drift off into a historical reverie, take with you the knowledge that the past is never truly past, and the lessons of history continue to resonate with us today. In the swirling sands of history, the year 750 CE marks a seismic shift, a time when the Abbasid Caliphate decided it was time to flip the script on the Umayyads, and by flip, I mean dethrone them in a dramatic fashion that could rival any modern political thriller. So, who were these Abbasids? Think of them as the underdogs who pulled off the ultimate coup d'etat. This is the story of how they emerged from the shadows, wielded religion like a double-edged sword, and carved out a realm that would become the pinnacle of the Islamic Golden Age. Let's set the stage. The Umayyad dynasty had been at the helm since 661 CE, ruling from their swanky digs in Damascus. But their reign was about as popular as pineapple on pizza in some circles. They were seen by many as too focused on worldly pleasures and not nearly devout enough. Enter the Abbasids, who claimed descent from none other than Muhammad's uncle, Al-Abbas. They used this lineage like a golden ticket, appealing to the masses by promising a return to the pure, uncorrupted days of early Islam. It was a marketing strategy that would make even Don Draper take notes. Now, the Abbasids didn't just show up and ask nicely for the throne. No, they orchestrated an uprising that was as stealthy as it was strategic, cleverly rallying support across various discontented groups. This wasn't just a simple case of out with the old, in with the new. The Abbasids had to navigate a landscape littered with tribal allegiances, familial ties, and a whole lot of political maneuvering. Imagine Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and more camels. One of the most pivotal moments in this power struggle was the Battle of the Zab in 750 CE. Here, the Abbasids, led by the charismatic Abu al-Abbas al-Safa, faced off against the Umayyad forces. Spoiler alert, the Abbasids won. But it wasn't just a victory, it was a slaughter. Al-Safa, whose nickname literally means the bloodshedder, lived up to his moniker, ensuring there would be no Umayyad comeback tour. It was a brutal assertion of power, underscoring the harsh reality of medieval politics where mercy was often considered a liability. The Abbasids didn't just change rulers, they changed the game. They moved the capital to Baghdad in 762 CE, a city that quickly became the center of a vibrant, multicultural empire. This was not just a geographical shift, it was a symbolic one. By relocating the capital, the Abbasids were making a statement. They were here to build something new and enduring. Baghdad was more than just a city. It was a beacon of innovation and culture, drawing scholars, scientists, and thinkers from all corners of the known world. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The Abbasids were masterful at using religion to unify their diverse empire, but they were also experts at wielding it as a weapon. They presented themselves as the true protectors of Islam, which earned them significant support, especially from the Shia Muslims who had long felt marginalized under Umayyad rule. Yet, once in power, the Abbasids were not above using ruthless tactics to maintain control. They were brilliant at political theater, understanding that a well-timed sermon could be as powerful as an army. Their promises of equality and justice were, at times, more rhetoric than reality. The Abbasids knew how to play the Game of Thrones, and like any good player, they weren't afraid to bend the rules. They had to constantly balance the interests of various factions, from the Persian, Mawali to the Arab elites, all while keeping an eye on the Byzantine Empire looming to the west. The Abbasids were adept at forming alliances when needed and breaking them when it suited their purposes. Behind the grandeur of their palaces and the splendor of their court, there was a complex web of espionage and intrigue. The Abbasid Caliphate was a place where power was both a blessing and a curse, where every alliance was temporary and every friend could potentially be an enemy. Yet, despite the internal strife and external threats, the Abbasids managed to create a legacy that would last for centuries. It's easy to get lost in the romance of the Abbasid era, with its tales of scholars and scientists, poets and philosophers. But at its core, the rise of the Abbasids is a story of ambition and cunning, of promises made and sometimes broken. It's a testament to the power of ideas and the lengths people will go to in pursuit of them. The Abbasids didn't just build an empire, they crafted a narrative, one that would resonate through time and space, leaving an indelible mark on history. So, here we are, Baghdad in its prime, a city that was less about camel caravans and more about intellectual caravansaries. The Abbasid Caliphate, now firmly in control, transformed this city into the beating heart of their empire. Baghdad was more than just a political capital. It was the nerve center of innovation, a place where ideas collided as fiercely as the traders in its bustling markets. Forget Silicon Valley. This was more like a silicon oasis, except instead of tech moguls in Teslas, you had philosophers on camels. At the center of this intellectual renaissance was the House of Wisdom, founded in the early 9th century by Caliph Al-Mamun. Think of it as a blend of the Library of Alexandria, a modern think tank, and your local coffee shop, where scholars would gather to sip on spiced brews and discuss the mysteries of the universe. The Abbasids had a thing for knowledge, and they spared no expense in their quest to acquire it. They lured scholars from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond, offering them the 9th century equivalent of 6-figure salaries and unlimited falafel. The result? A melting pot of minds that made breakthroughs in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy that would echo through the ages. Take, for example, the mathematician Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, whose work on algebra laid the foundation for modern mathematics. Yes, you can thank, or curse, him for high school algebra. His book, the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, wasn't exactly light reading, but it was groundbreaking. And then there was Hunayn ibn Ishaq, the translator extraordinaire, who turned the works of Greek philosophers into Arabic, ensuring that Aristotle and Plato would find a new audience in the Islamic world. But this wasn't just an era of intellectual achievements. It was also a time of economic dynamism. Baghdad was strategically located at the crossroads of trade routes that spanned from China to the Mediterranean. Imagine bustling bazaars filled with silks from China, spices from India, and precious metals from Africa. The city's economy was the envy of the world, with a GDP that would make any modern-day economist smile. The Abbasids knew that a thriving economy required more than just trade, though. It needed infrastructure. They invested in roads, bridges, and canals, which might not sound glamorous, but were the lifeblood of their empire. Yet, the glittering facade of Baghdad's prosperity came with its own set of challenges. For one, maintaining such a vast empire required a hefty budget. The Abbasids' grand projects and lavish court life meant that taxes were steep, and not everyone was thrilled about it. The caliphs were like rock stars of their time, with entourages to match, and keeping up appearances was no small feat. It's like they were throwing the world's most extravagant party, but had to constantly worry about who was footing the bill. The Abbasids were also dealing with the ever-present pressures of managing a multicultural empire. Their realm was a tapestry of cultures, languages, and religions, And while that diversity was a source of strength, it was also a potential powder keg. The caliphs walked a tightrope, balancing the interests of Arab elites, Persian bureaucrats, and various other ethnic groups, all while trying to keep the peace. It was a delicate dance, one that required diplomatic finesse, and at times, ruthless pragmatism. This brings us to one of the most enduring myths of the Abbasid era, the idea that it was a utopia of peace and harmony. While the Abbasids certainly fostered a golden age of cultural and scientific achievements, life in their empire was far from idyllic. Political intrigue was as common as the daily call to prayer, and power struggles within the court were as inevitable as the Tigris River flowing through Baghdad. The Abbasids were masters of realpolitik, often resorting to assassinations and betrayals to maintain their grip on power. In this game, the stakes were as high as the minarets that dotted the skyline. Yet, despite the backroom dealings and the ever-present threat of rebellion, the Abbasid Golden Age left an indelible mark on history. It was a period that saw the flourishing of art and literature, from the enchanting tales of 1001 Nights to the poetic verses of Al-Mutanabi. Was a time when the boundaries of the known world expanded, thanks to scholars who dared to question the status quo and explore the unknown. The Abbasids created a space where ideas could flourish, and in doing so, they set the stage for the intellectual revolutions that would follow. As with any golden age, the Abbasid era was a complex tapestry woven from threads of ambition, innovation, and conflict. It was a time when the pursuit of knowledge was seen as a noble endeavor, even if it came with its share of challenges. The Abbasids may have been driven by lofty ideals, but they were also shaped by the harsh realities of ruling an empire. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the eternal struggle to balance dreams with practicalities. And so, as we leave the glittering halls of Baghdad for now, remember that history is never as simple as it seems. The Abbasid Caliphate was a beacon of learning and culture, yet it was also a place of intrigue and ambition. In the next part of our journey, we'll delve deeper into the cultural achievements and societal changes that defined this era, exploring both the romance and the reality of life under Abbasid rule. The story of the Abbasids is far from over, and there's much more to uncover as we continue our exploration of this fascinating chapter in history. As the glittering dust of Baghdad's grandeur settles, let's zoom in on the human tapestry that composed the Abbasid Caliphate. It was a society as intricate and colorful as a Persian rug, but not without its frayed edges and loose threads. The Abbasids, for all their talk of unity and progress, presided over a melting pot where social harmony was more an aspiration than reality. Let's start with the roles and rights of women, a topic that's as complex as a medieval love triangle. In Abbasid society, women's rights were a mixed bag. On one hand, women from affluent families enjoyed certain privileges, education, property rights, and influence in domestic affairs. Some, like the formidable Zubaydah, wife of Caliph Harun al-Rashid, wielded significant power. Zubaydah wasn't just any caliphal spouse. She famously financed the construction of the Zubaydah Trail, a series of wells and stations along the pilgrimage route from Baghdad to Mecca. Talk about leaving your mark. Yet, these impressive feats were not the norm for most women. The average woman navigating the bustling streets of Baghdad had fewer opportunities. Her life was often confined to the domestic sphere, with societal norms and religious interpretations limiting her public presence. It's like being in an exclusive club where you can see the party, but aren't always invited to dance. But here's the kicker. Even within these constraints, women found ways to assert their agency. Some became scholars, poets, and even spies, subtly influencing the societal currents around them. If history has taught us anything, it's that where there's a will, there's a way, and the Abbasid women had plenty of both. Now, shifting our focus to the class structure, we find a hierarchy that could rival any modern corporate ladder, complete with its own brand of office politics. At the top were the caliphs and their court, living in opulence that would make your neighborhood billionaire blush. Below them, the bureaucrats and scholars formed the intellectual elite, a sort of ancient think tank that kept the wheels of the empire turning. These were the folks who could debate philosophy by day and party at the caliphal palace by night. Not a bad gig if you could get it, but it wasn't all banquets and brain power. The vast majority of the population consisted of artisans, merchants, farmers, and laborers who kept the economy humming. These were the unsung heroes of the Abbasid machine, the ones who actually did the heavy lifting, literally. Their lives were a roller coaster of market fluctuations and tax burdens, dictated by the whims of those at the top. In this social pyramid, mobility was about as common as a snowstorm in Baghdad. Sure, a few might climb the ladder through talent or luck, but for most, the ceiling was set pretty low. Cultural diversity added another layer to this already complicated social fabric. The Abbasid Caliphate was a veritable United Nations of its time, with Arabs, Persians, Turks, Berbers, and others coexisting in a sort of medieval melting pot. This diversity was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it fueled the intellectual and cultural vibrancy for which the Abbasid era is justly celebrated. The cross-pollination of ideas led to advancements in science, literature, and art that would have been impossible in a homogeneous society. On the other hand, such diversity also sowed seeds of discord. Ethnic and religious tensions simmered beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over into open conflict. The Persian Mawali, non-Arab Muslims who felt marginalized under the Umayyads, saw their fortunes improve under the Abbasids, but not without friction. The caliphs had to juggle these competing interests with the finesse of a circus performer, balancing on a tightrope of diplomacy and realpolitik. When it worked, it was a beautiful thing. When it didn't, well, let's just say the fallout could be as explosive as a Baghdad bazaar on sale day. The myth of a perfectly harmonious society is just that, a myth. The Abbasid caliphs were more like skilled jugglers than benevolent rulers, constantly tossing balls of power, politics, and people in the air. They had to keep the various factions within their empire happy, or at least not openly rebellious. It was a game of chess with real stakes, and the caliphs knew that a single wrong move could checkmate their rule. Take the example of Caliph Al-Mamun, who in 813 CE faced a civil war against his own brother, Al-Amin. It was a classic sibling rivalry taken to the extreme, complete with sieges and betrayals. Al-Mamun eventually triumphed, but the conflict left deep scars on the empire's unity. It was a reminder that for all the Abbasids' talk of a unified caliphate, the reality was as fragmented as a broken mosaic. Even religion, the supposed glue holding the empire together, was a source of division. The Abbasids, who had risen to power with Shia support, quickly shifted their allegiance to the Sunni orthodoxy once the throne was secure. This Beitan switch left many Shia Muslims feeling betrayed, fueling sectarian tensions that would echo through the centuries. The story of the Abbasids is one of ambition and contradiction, a reminder that history, like life, is rarely black and white. As we peel back the layers of the Abbasid Caliphate, we find a society that was as dynamic as it was divided, a testament to the complexity of human civilization. The Abbasids' ability to maintain their diverse empire for as long as they did is a testament to their political savvy. But it was no easy feat. The tensions simmering beneath the surface were always there, threatening to unravel the delicate tapestry they had woven. So, while it's tempting to romanticize the Abbasid era as a golden age of peace and prosperity, the truth is far more nuanced. It was a time of great achievements and great challenges, a period when dreams of unity often collided with the harsh reality of human nature. The Abbasids were visionaries, yes, but they were also pragmatists, acutely aware of the fragile balance that held their empire together. As we leave this chapter behind, remember that the story of the Abbasid Caliphate is far from over. The social fabric they wove was a complex tapestry, full of vibrant colors and intricate patterns, but also frayed edges and hidden tensions. In the next part of our journey, we'll delve deeper into the cultural and intellectual achievements of this era, exploring both the light and the shadows that defined life under Abbasid rule. The tale of the Abbasids continues, and there's much more to discover as we unravel the threads of this fascinating chapter in history. As the grandeur of the Abbasid Caliphate recedes into the background, let's face the music. Empires don't fall in a day. The Abbasids, who had once dazzled the world with their intellectual fireworks and cultural renaissance, were headed for a slow, albeit dramatic, decline. Imagine a glittering chandelier beginning to lose its luster piece by piece. That's the Abbasid story post-Golden Age. It's a saga of economic strains, external pressures, and internal squabbles that would make any soap opera seem tame. First, let's talk money. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that empires run on it, and the Abbasids were no exception. By the 9th century, the empire's finances were starting to resemble a teenager's piggy bank, perpetually empty. The cost of maintaining such a vast realm was astronomical, and the caliphs were feeling the pinch. The treasury was hemorrhaging silver like a leaky bucket, thanks in part to their penchant for lavish public works and the infamous courtly extravagance. They were trying to keep up appearances while the Kafirs were scraping bottom. This financial strain was like a persistent migraine, the kind that keeps you up at night and makes you question all your life choices. Here's a fun economic fact. The Abbasids introduced paper currency in the form of promissory notes, or sack, the origin of the modern word check. It was a clever workaround for the dwindling silver reserves, but it was also a band-aid on a bullet wound. The real problem was that these notes were only as good as the confidence behind them, and confidence was in short supply. Inflation was creeping in like an unwelcome guest, and the economy was feeling the squeeze. It's like they were trying to throw a party without enough pizza. Something was bound to go wrong. But financial woes were only half the story. The Abbasids were also getting battered by external pressures that were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. The 9th century saw the rise of the Samanids in Persia and the Chelunids in Egypt, regions that were supposed to be under Abbasid control. These semi-autonomous dynasties began carving out their own power niches, and let's just say they weren't exactly sending Christmas cards to Baghdad. This decentralization of power meant that the Abbasid Caliphate was more like a patchwork quilt than a cohesive empire. Each autonomous region was doing its own thing, and the central authority of the Caliph was more ornamental than operational. And then there were the Buyids, Persian mercenaries who decided they liked the idea of holding the puppet strings in Baghdad. By the mid-10th century, they had waltzed into the capital and effectively reduced the Caliph to a figurehead. It was a classic coup d'etat, and the Caliphs had about as much real power as a ceremonial mayor. The Buyids were calling the shots, and the Abbasid Caliphs were left to watch from the sidelines, their authority as diminished as a deflated balloon. Internal discord was the final nail in the Abbasid coffin. The Caliphate was rife with factionalism, as various groups vied for influence within the government. This wasn't just a matter of whispered conspiracies and clandestine meetings. It was full-blown political infighting. The viziers, those high-ranking officials who were supposed to be the Caliph's right-hand men, were often more interested in their own power plays than in effective governance. Imagine a boardroom where every executive is plotting against the others. That's pretty much what the Abbasid court looked like in its twilight years. Then there's the matter of religion. The Abbasids had always claimed to be the guardians of Islam, but their religious policies were as consistent as a weather vane in a storm. The Caliphs oscillated between Sunni orthodoxy and Mutazilism, an Islamic rationalist movement, like a pendulum on overdrive. This vacillation didn't exactly endear them to their subjects, who were growing tired of the theological flip-flopping. It's like trying to sell vegan hot dogs at a BBQ festival, confusing, to say the least. The real kicker came in 1258, when Baghdad faced the mother of all wake-up calls, the Mongol invasion. Led by Hulagu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, the Mongols swept across the Middle East with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. They laid siege to Baghdad, and within a matter of days, the city fell. What followed was a massacre of epic proportions. The sacking of Baghdad was a grim affair, with the Tigris allegedly running black with the ink of countless destroyed books. It was a brutal end to what had once been the beating heart of a great empire, like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. The fall of Baghdad in 1258 was more than just a military defeat. It was the symbolic end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a major power. Their influence had been waning for centuries, but the Mongol invasion was the final curtain call. It was as if the Abbasids had been on life support, and Hulagu Khan pulled the plug. The Caliphate continued in name only, with a shadow of its former glory preserved in Cairo under the patronage of the Mamluks, but the days of Abbasid dominance were over. So, what do we take away from this historical unraveling? The Abbasids' decline wasn't the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather a series of compounding crises, economic, political, and social, that chipped away at their power. They were like an aging rock band trying to stay relevant while the world moved on. Yet, for all its chaos and collapse, the Abbasid era left an indelible mark on history, paving the way for new powers and setting the stage for future cultural and intellectual renaissances. As we close this chapter, remember that the Abbasid Caliphate story isn't just about its decline or the sacking of Baghdad. It's about the vibrant, albeit tumultuous, dance between power and culture, ambition and reality. The Abbasids may have faded into history, but their legacy, both glorious and grim, continues to resonate. Their story is a testament to the complexities of empire, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall when the winds of change begin to blow. Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll explore the echoes of the Abbasid era and the new chapters that emerged from the ashes of their fall. And so, as the dust of history begins to settle, let's take a moment to appreciate the Abbasid legacy, a tale of grandeur and grit that continues to ripple through the annals of time like a stone tossed into a pond. The Abbasids may have left the building, but their impact is far from departed. Now, let's dive into how their achievements and slip-ups echo through the corridors of history all the way to our buzzing, caffeinated present. First off, let's talk intellectual legacy, because if the Abbasids had a calling card, it would read purveyors of knowledge and culture. During their prime, they turned Baghdad into a magnet for scholars, effectively creating what could be seen as the world's first think tank. The House of Wisdom, with its cadre of scholars, translators and philosophers, was the intellectual equivalent of Woodstock. Ever heard of the term algorithm? You can thank Al-Khwarizmi for that, an Abbasid scholar whose work laid the foundations for modern mathematics. His name even gives us the word algebra. So next time you're solving for X, give a nod to this 9th century math whiz. The Abbasids also played a crucial role in preserving ancient texts. While Europe was busy misplacing its classical learning during the so-called Dark Ages, the Abbasids were translating and preserving works of Aristotle, Plato, and Hippocrates. This preservation act was a gift that kept on giving, influencing the Renaissance and beyond. Picture it as a cultural relay race where the Abbasids passed the baton of knowledge to future generations, ensuring the race didn't end in a fumble. But for all their scholarly pursuits, the Abbasids were no strangers to the complexities of governance. Their reign is a case study in the perils of managing diversity. The Caliphate was a veritable mosaic of cultures, religions, and languages. They had Arabs, Persians, Turks, and Berbers all under one roof, making the United Nations look like a neighborhood block party. This diversity was both a source of strength and a minefield of challenges. The Abbasids had to be as adept at diplomacy as they were at warfare, balancing the scales between unity and discord like a high-wire act without a safety net. And then there's the economic legacy. The Abbasids were early adopters of a bustling trade network that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. They were the original globalists, if you will. Their capital, Baghdad, was strategically located at the crossroads of these trade routes, making it the Wall Street of the medieval world. The city buzzed with activity as merchants traded in silks, spices, and precious metals. This economic dynamism funded their grand projects and opulent lifestyle, but it also set the stage for their eventual financial woes. Think of it as living in a mansion, but drowning in mortgage payments. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, coffee. The Abbasids didn't actually invent coffee, but they did help popularize it. The first coffee house is thought to have appeared in the 15th century in the Ottoman Empire, long after the Abbasid era. But the seeds of this caffeinated revolution were planted in the cultural soil the Abbasids cultivated. They were the original proponents of social spaces for intellectual discourse, and it's not a stretch to imagine them appreciating the modern coffee shop as a hub of conversation and creativity. Picture an Abbasid scholar in a Starbucks, pondering a soy latte and the mysteries of the universe. They'd probably have some choice words about our penchant for pumpkin spice. Though, as for political legacy, the Abbasids left a cautionary tale about the dangers of centralization and overreach. Their initial success was built on a broad base of support, but as they consolidated power, they became increasingly detached from the realities of their diverse empire. The lesson here is as timeless as it is simple. Power is a balancing act, and leaning too far in any direction can tip the scales. It's a narrative that resonates even today. Societies grapple with the challenges of unity and division in an increasingly interconnected world. So, what would the Abbasids make of modern society? Well, they'd probably marvel at our technological advancements and the speed at which information travels. In their day, getting a message from Baghdad to Cairo could take weeks. Now, it's a matter of seconds. They'd likely appreciate the global exchange of ideas, though they might be puzzled by our obsession with cat videos. And as for our coffee culture, they'd probably nod in approval at how a simple bean has become a global phenomenon, a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange. In wrapping up, the Abbasid legacy is a multifaceted one, a tapestry woven from threads of knowledge, culture, and ambition. Their story is a reminder of the highs and lows of human achievement, a saga of vision and vaulting ambition tempered by the harsh realities of empire. The Abbasids may have faded into the background of history, but their influence continues to shape the world in ways both subtle and profound. Their era was a golden age, not because it was perfect, but because it dared to dream big, even when the odds were stacked against it. In the end, the Abbasid Caliphate was a grand experiment in power and culture, a testament to the complexities of empire and the enduring human quest for knowledge and understanding. As we sip our modern brews and ponder the past, let's remember the Abbasids as both legendary architects of a golden age and as real people navigating the tumultuous waters of history. Their legacy is a mirror reflecting the best and worst of our own potential, a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the pursuit of knowledge and the quest for understanding are eternal.